All right, we got great attendance today. Thank you all so much for driving to the TRPA office and joining us. And happy holidays to everyone. This is our last meeting of the year, which is great. And I'm going to call this meeting to order. This is the Tahoe Regional Planning Agency's Advisory Planning Commission. Today is Wednesday, December 6th, 2023. I have 9:32. And the first item on our agenda is the roll call to determine our quorum, and I'm going to pass it to Tracy.
Mr. Oling? Ms. Carr? Here, thank you. Ms. Chandler?
Yes, I'm here. Thank you.
Mr. Drake?
Here.
Mr. Drew?
Good morning.
Mr. Ferry?
Here.
Ms. Ferris? Mr. Hill?
Good morning.
Ms. Jacobson? Here. Mr. Letton? Ms. Morales O'Neill? Mr. Hitchcock?
Here.
Ms. Simon?
Here.
Ms. Stala?
Here.
Mr. Stephen?
Jim Drennan standing in for Chad Stephen.
Thank you, Chief Drennan. Mr. Teixeira?
Good morning.
And Mr. Young?
Good morning.
Mr. Chair, we have a quorum.
Thank you, Tracy. Did someone say they were present for Mr. Stephen?
Yeah, Fire Chief Jim Drennan.
Oh,
is
okay.
Stepping in. I'll change his name.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you.
Just so I can call on the correct person. Yeah. Okay. The correct chief. So thank you. We have great attendance today. So thanks everyone. Let me go over the the remote meeting rules of the day. So to observe the meeting, go to trpa.gov. Under the calendar header, click on Advisory Planning Commission Meeting, Hybrid Meeting for December 6, 2023. And there you will find a link to the public webinar hosted on Zoom. To address APC members directly with your comments, raise your hand in Zoom by clicking the Raise Hand button at the bottom of your screen during the appropriate agenda item. With your hand raised, you'll be unmuted by TRPA staff and have 3 minutes to address the APC. If you have used the dial-in numbers to join us by telephone, you can dial *9 to raise your hand and you'll be unmuted. To my fellow APC members, if you wish to speak, you can also raise your hand in Zoom. Remote APC members, please do not use the chat box for sidebar conversations. Reminder to mute your microphone unless you'd like us to hear what you're saying. And also, if you could turn on your cameras so we can see, that would be great. Okay, moving on to item 2, which is approval of our agenda. Staff, any changes to the agenda?
No, Mr. Chairman, no changes.
Thanks, John. And I'll go ahead and deem the agenda approved as it was posted for the record. On to item 3, public interest comments. If any member of the public wishes to address the Advisory Planning Commission at this time, please either come to the podium or raise your hand now by clicking the Raise Hand button at the bottom of your Zoom screen or by dialing *9 on your telephone, and you will be called on and unmuted by a TRPA staff member. Written comments received before 4 p.m. yesterday were forwarded to APC members. Late comments may be distributed and posted after the meeting. Any unheard comments can be submitted via email to publiccomment@trpa.gov. Please include the meeting information and agenda item in the subject line of your email. Please note the APC is prohibited by law from taking immediate action on or discussing issues raised by the public that are not listed on our agenda. And I'm going to go into the room first for public comment, and then we'll go online, okay? So go ahead, Ms. Waller.
Good morning, Ellie Waller. Thank you for all of you that are here today and participating. I have an overarching statement this morning about regional growth and how it applies to both agenda items. Truckee, Carson City, Reno, Western Placer County, just to name a few Reno has had over 35,000 permits in recent years. It does affect the basin and the regional impacts, and the current economic issues affect the residents, the tourist population, and sometimes it's a roller coaster ride for developers. I'm conscientious enough about my life and what the cost is to live in Tahoe. I don't live here anymore, but this is my backyard, and I am very happy to still continue to participate. Second topic is just a generality about recusal and future and further maybe discussions about this. Yesterday, Placer County Supervisor Gustafson, who happens to be the TRPA governing board chair, had to recuse herself on 2 Kings Beach projects. And it is about the financial issues in her case. And I know that from time to time, things could happen for each local jurisdiction. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Waller. Any other public comments in the room? Seeing none. Catherine, how about online?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We have 1 hand raised so far. Christina Hill, if you unmute, you can address the commission.
I'm sorry, I did that for another item on the agenda. Sorry. I'm sorry, I did that for another item on the agenda. Apologize.
Got it.
Mr. Chair, there are no hands raised to comment on this item.
Okay, thank you, Catherine. Thank you all. Let me move us to item 4, which is disposition of minutes. The November 8, 2023 APC minutes are included. Wait, let me read this again. The November 8, 2023 APC minutes will be included in the January 10th, 2024 packet. Do I have that right? Okay, no minutes to vote on. Steve had a little less reading to do. It'll probably be a booklet. You'll have to put a table of contents in the front of it.
That would be helpful.
Okay. Now on to the meat of our agenda. Item 5, public hearings. We are going to first hear from TRPA staff on item 5A. This is a presentation on the 2020 U.S. Census demographics for the Tahoe region and other available data. Information can be found on page 5 of our packets. And I'm going to pass this to Ken Caseman with TRPA to present on this item. Good morning.
Good morning. Thank you, Mr. Chair and members of the APC. Again, for the record, Ken Caseman. I'm the department director for the research analysis team here at TRPA. And it's a pleasure to be here today. Next slide, please. Before we jump into the demographic data, I wanted to just provide a little bit of background and context for this presentation. So as many of you know, through various public meetings and engagement with the community, we've heard a lot of issues from members of the community about a variety of issues that we can see here on the slide related to overuse, related to the use of our resources regionally, traffic, and what we sense is there's a significant disconnect between what people are feeling and sensing locally and what the data are showing us. And so this presentation was really designed to try to look at a wide set of data that may help inform more about what it is that people are feeling and sensing and reporting to us in public comment or reporting to us in some of these discussions that we're having in the public. And this really reached a fever pitch, I think, during COVID, and over the last couple of years, as we've seen trash on the beaches after the holidays, as we've seen, a variety of different, discussion points and, kind of fever pitch as some of these articles have hit in the media. And so again, we just wanted to sort of talk about this and lay out the data that we do have available. Next slide, please. At a national level, during COVID and beyond, we have seen a significant shift towards outdoor recreation. You can see here about 7 million new Americans participating in outdoor recreation just since 2019. And a significant contribution of that activity to local economy and to regional GDP. We've seen this manifest in a number of different ways where national parks were overrun and had to shut down or limit how many people could come. And again, during COVID, Tahoe was seen as a respite to that. It was drivable, so those who didn't want to participate in air travel were able to drive here, were able to recreate, and we saw the significant increase in Tahoe because of that. And quite frankly, we didn't have the infrastructure to support a lot of that. And so whether it's looking at parking at our recreation facilities, whether it's just overall infrastructure, it's no surprise that we're having challenges related to this increase in outdoor recreation. And again, this is what a lot of our initiatives and strategic priorities are designed to accommodate. Next slide, please. Going back, again, just sort of laying the foundation, gaming was what brought people to Tahoe, going back as far as this area was founded. But when California in particular signed treaties to allow Native American gaming in the late 90s and early 2000s, it forever changed the trajectory of Tahoe and Reno and other areas that were really focused on gaming as their primary drivers of the economy. We were losing jobs somewhat before that, and you can see here the green line is employment at the South Shore casinos, but it definitely compounded those losses. And between 1990 and 2022 on this chart, casino employment dropped 80%. And meanwhile, casino revenue was down 35% and occupied rooms down 25% from their peaks. So significant change in terms of what people were coming to do in Tahoe and the representative effect that had on our gaming economy in the region. And of course, that has wider effect on schools, population, and employment in the broader economy as well. Next slide, please. We've also seen, as we look at data related to climate change, that Tahoe is considered a refuge for particularly those communities that are in the valleys and spread throughout California. That we've seen data through the Science Council that the difference between a 65-degree day in Sacramento and a 100-degree day in Sacramento is a doubling of the traffic into Tahoe over Eckett Summit. So we definitely see that when temperatures rise in the valleys, people come to Tahoe to escape that heat and to recreate here. And so again, these are trends that started well before COVID, but it is definitely something that affects the overall trends. Next slide, please. As we, I want to actually just maybe pause here for a second, because in public comment and also in probably everybody's minds around the table, we see we're talking about the 2020 census data, and we're sitting here in December 2023, and it likely feels that this data is stale. And I want to address that head on because, you know, the US Census Bureau conducts a census every 10 years. And the 2020 census data is the most accurate and latest available data that we have for population in the region. And so that's why we're focused on this. The reason it's timely is actually this data was only fully published this last summer, just a couple months ago. And that's when this information was compiled and put together for this presentation. So it is the most recent available full census data. Now, the Census Bureau does produce other products that are slightly more timely. And so there's the American Community Survey that is done on an annual basis. That the current vintage of that information is 2021. We are expecting the 2022 data to be released next week. And so that will give us updated population information for the country and for Tahoe. And we will update our, there's some links at the end of this presentation. We will update that information as soon as we have it and publish what the latest information shows. But to be clear, you know, the reason we're focused on 2020 data is it is the latest available information that we have. And again, the reason that we're providing this presentation and the rest of the information that we're going to walk through is because we don't have more timely information about our population. We are looking at other indicators and other data that may help us see what's happening and address some of these disconnects that we're hearing between population and the sense that people have that there's more people here or that it's never been busier or some of those sense and feelings that we're hearing in the community. So that's, again, why we're going through this today. So next slide, please. So in terms of the 2020 census, the regional population was 55,800 residents, full-time residents. That was generally flat from 2010. And really the thing to point out here is that what we saw between 1990 and 2000 was nearly a 20% increase in the regional population. And the regional population peaked in that 2000 timeframe. And since then, 1 of every 9 residents has left the region and has not returned. And we've seen this both in the population data, and we'll see it in the employment data in a minute as well. But that is significant because, again, you think about in 2000, we had housing for all this population. We had already, you know, employment for this population. We had education and schools for you know, students. And all of that infrastructure is still in place, but we've lost all, you know, nearly 8,000 to 9,000 residents. And so again, it's a significant change. Next slide, please. As we drill in a little bit deeper, and again, responding to some of the comments about that we received from public comment, if we drill in a little bit deeper. So on the Nevada side, we actually did see faster growth in terms of population gain. And you can see essentially all the, I know it's hard to read the slide here, but anything to the right is increasing population, anything to the left is decreasing population. And it again corresponds to the colors on the map. We did see 7% increase in our population in Nevada, Tahoe, between 2010 and 2020. Meanwhile, California side of the region dropped, population dropped 2%. And again, to put that in context, and Ellie mentioned this as well, the overall state of California grew 6% during this time. So to see a 2% drop in the California population in Tahoe is running counter to what is happening in the state as a whole. And in Nevada, it's even more pronounced. There's a 15% growth in Nevada state population from 2010 to 2020, and a 15% increase as well in areas like Sacramento and in Reno. And so again, to only grow 7% in Tahoe's population on the Nevada side, is running somewhat counter to what we're seeing at the state level as well. To drill in a little bit deeper, the North Shore actually saw about a 2% increase overall, including both on the California side and Nevada side. But again, most of that is going to be in Incline Village and Crystal Bay areas. On the South Shore, population was flat. Again, the fastest growing community was Incline, which grew about 8%. And again, we've heard public comment from people that feel like population has doubled in recent years. The census is showing, again, through 2020, about a 1% growth per year between 2010 and 2020. So we're not seeing anything nearly as significant as what people are reporting to us, but there is definitely population growth in those communities. Next slide, please. A couple of other things that were significant and jumped out to us when we were looking at this data. One is that over time, Tahoe has been getting older, and not just as a result of people aging, but actually as a significant change in our population blocks. And so here we can see the median age in Tahoe is actually 44 years old, and we have more residents over age 50 than we do under age 35. Fairly significant. When population peaked in 2000, we had about 40% of the population was under 30. Now it's less than 30%. And again, when we look at this in detail, what we see is that we actually gained 15,000 residents. Gained 8,000 residents over age 55, but lost 15,000 residents under 30. And so we had this significant shift, and you can see it in the red line here, of that change. And so it's not just, groups aging, it's actually a replacement of that population. And on the next slide, we'll look at another similar piece where our high earning households in the region have doubled since 2000. And while that sounds like a great thing, obviously we want our population to be high earning. What we're really seeing here is a loss of population at those lower income levels and a replacement of higher income residents, not people just making more money, unfortunately. And so again, here we're seeing a 44% increase in households making more than 75,000 and a loss of about 14,000 residents, or 35% in those lower income areas. So fairly significant shift there as well.
Hey, Ken, how do you know that someone in 2016 who was making 40,000 isn't the person now in 2021 making 150,000? You said it's a replacement of those two, but how can you be certain about that?
Yeah, we can't for sure know, but I think when you look at the data, there are just simply more households making that. And we do have some data that shows where people have moved from and to, and includes demographic information. So we can see that the residents who have recently moved to the region are making more than the people that they replaced, or that, when they purchased a property, the prior residents, they're making more than those prior residents. We have been able to see that in some of the data that we've looked at, but it's more anecdotal. But the shift likely is more related to these more fundamental shifts.
Hey, Ken, as a follow-up question, do you have data that shows the job, like household jobs, if they're local jobs versus has that changed? Or perhaps you're going to get into that, for households, has the local household, how do I say that? Folks in a household that work locally, has that declined versus folks that say are working out of the Bay Area and living locally now?
Yeah, so I mentioned the American Community Survey as one of the census products, and one of the things that report produces is a detailed analysis of commute patterns and work from home, and where people work And so when the 2022 data comes out next week, we will likely have a little bit more insight. The challenge with that information is that the ACS data is a 5-year average. And so the current data that we have is basically from 2017 to 2021, and it's averaged over that time frame. So it's not yet picking up on post-COVID trends and some of the shifts that we may expect to see. It's the nature of the data. It's a 5-year average. And so the 2022 data may start to show more of that shift. But I think, I think there's more work to be done to understand that. And we've been talking with a lot of the larger local employers to see if we can get better information about where their employees live and how they're getting to work, whether they're commuting, whether they're carpooling, all of that information. We're trying to work with our larger employers to get more insight into that data. Yeah, okay, we can. So next slide, please. So when we look at some of this data, and again, we've looked at, again, what we sense that there's this significant disconnect between what people are feeling and and the data that we're showing and seeing in the census data, or even in some of the employment data and other things. And so we wanted to explore other data sources that may help us identify whether there's trends that we're missing, or whether we can fill in some of the gap between the 2020 data or even 2021 that we have from the census, and help us sense whether things have shifted. And so when we look at this, we kind of identified these sort of bucketed patterns that we're seeing that are represented here. And we're going to walk through a couple different data sets, but generally what we're seeing, and maybe we'll go on to the next slide that sort of illustrates this, and then we'll go on. But what we were seeing in this data, this line shows our entry and exit volumes of vehicles entering and exiting the region at this 7 highways in and out of the basin. And what we see is kind of in the 90s, we had this steady increase as gaming peaked. And we had again that the influence of Native American gaming that started to show kind of in those early 2000 timeframes. We started to see that decline. And you can see it here with the entry and exit volumes that dropped well off in kind of the late 2000s. And then we started to recover kind of 2011, 2012, we started to see that recovery kick off. And going all the way up into 2019, we were seeing the significant recovery in terms of traffic volumes coming into the basin. And then COVID hit. And, in COVID, you see that significant drop in 2020 and then a recovery in 2021 and going into 2022. But when we look at that volumes, that 2019 volume was still well below those historic peaks in the early 2000s. And again, when we saw the recovery in 2021 coming into 2022, we're still below 19 and those prior periods. And so again, we're in terms of volumes of vehicles coming into the basin, we're still well below those peaks. If we go on to the next slide, we have this is looking at TOT rooms rented. So how many hotel rooms, campground sites, and vacation rentals in the city of South Lake Tahoe. And you see, again, that significant drop during the recession, a recovery as we started to see the peak of outdoor recreation or the increase there, and then COVID. And again, TOT in particular dropped significantly during COVID and did bounce back, but again, well below those historic peaks. Next slide. This is Reno Tahoe Airport passenger volumes. And again, significantly higher volumes in the early 2000s. 2019 was starting to get back to those levels. In fact, 2019 was one of the highest years in about a decade. But then with COVID, it took a while to recover particularly for air traffic. 2023 right now is on track to surpass 2019, but it will still be below those early 2000s periods in terms of passenger volume through Reno Tahoe Airport. Next slide, please. This looks at regional employment. So how many employees we have in the Tahoe region. And you can see this is a 20% drop from the 2000s to today. More than 9,000 jobs lost from our peak volumes here. And again, there's twice as many jobs lost on the South Shore than on the North Shore, directly related to the loss of casino employment on the South Shore. But we are seeing the number of business establishments slowly starting to increase, but the number of employees continues to drop, which again is a little bit of a troubling trend. Next slide, please. We also see this in K through 12 school enrollment. And again, this is likely no surprise to those of us in the region. On the Nevada side, we've lost 46% of employment enrollment in schools from the peak. And school enrollment overall is down 22% from peak volumes in the 2000s. Next slide. So again, as we're trying to research what may help us identify, are there more people here? One of the things that we thought would be particularly meaningful was to look at regional water use. And we gathered data from the Tahoe Water Suppliers Association and from STPUD. And what we see here is that, again, significantly higher volume of water usage in the 2000s, and then kind of mixed volumes. We did see about a 9% drop in 2000 with COVID, but then an 11% increase in 2021, but then again another drop in 2022, about an 8% drop in 2022. So nothing in this data is pointing to significantly more people here. And so again, next slide, please. So we're back to these questions. We also, we monitor travel time, and there's a number of different tools that are provided by the Federal Highway Administration that allows you to look at travel time on various segments of roadways. And here we look at 12 different segments. And if you combined them, it's about, I have the statistic here, it's about 100, I think it's about 180 miles of roadway combined. And if you drove all of them consecutively, it would take on the median about 2.5 hours to drive those segments. And at peak volumes, the data shows that it takes roughly about 40 minutes longer. And so we definitely do see at peak times that congestion is increased. But it's highly linked to road construction in the summertime and to winter conditions in the wintertime that affect the travel times more so than anything fundamental. And particularly when you look at the shoulder seasons, or you look at the fall and the spring, those values are significantly lower. And overall, most of our travel times are unchanged or slightly lower than they were over the last 5 years. And so again, we definitely see local impacts. And when we look at this in particular, if we go on to the next slide, you can see the combined travel time for all of these segments. And again, it's well down from peak volumes in kind of the mid 2010s, and not significantly changed over from 2021 to 2022. We do not yet have all the data necessary for 2023, but we did look at some of the particular areas. And in particular, we are seeing increases on the Nevada side. And so incline in 2023, our median time was slightly higher, and our peak time was about 10% higher in the summer and about 15% higher in the winter for 2023. So we do recognize that there are some specific areas, like we mentioned with population, where we are seeing increases. But at a regional scale, when you look at all of these roadways combined, we're not seeing significant shifts that would suggest larger populations as a whole, but more specific in certain areas there's higher, and in certain other areas the volumes are lower and the travel times are lower. Next slide, please. So why does it feel more crowded? Why are we getting so much public comment about this? Why do we all feel this? And one of the things is, again, when we think back to that slide a couple slides ago that was looking at those trends, is over the last 10 or 15 years, we've had a relatively good time of it. It hasn't been as crowded as it was before. And I think, we've maybe been blessed by lower volumes, and we've gotten used to that in part. There's also other potential reasons, and we're going to explore some of these, but second home use is a significant driver. There are roughly 50,000 residential units in the region, and 50% of our homes are second use, or they're vacant homes. They're not primary residences. And so, that's 25,000 units, of which vacation rentals are maybe 4,000 to 5,000 units. So for every vacation rental, you have roughly 4 to 5 other houses that are sitting vacant, that may be used for, ski leases. They may be used as second homes. But that's a significant potential impact if more people are using their second homes. Day use visitation certainly has increased, and we see this with the entry-exit data on, particularly on the Nevada side, as we've seen a lot more activity on the East Shore. And again, we'll look at this in a moment. But I think also what we're seeing is people are recreating at different places. And because of the availability of information, I think what a lot of locals are feeling is that their hidden spots are now overrun. And there's more people out there on the trails, on the beaches, in these areas where they didn't used to be. And that makes it feel busier. It makes it feel more crowded. But at a regional scale, it's really not more crowded. It's just more people where you want to be, more people on these trails. We're also seeing, again, changes in travel time and behavior, and we'll dig into this, but parking lots that used to fill up at 9 o'clock or 10 o'clock are now filling up earlier, 8 o'clock and 9 o'clock. You think about ski resorts and the parking lots filling up earlier than they used to. You think about Sand Harbor and that lot filling up. And so it's driving some of the roadside parking and changes in our commute patterns as well in the region. So next slide, please. So I mentioned the second homes, and again, regionally, 50% of our homes are second homes, but it's significantly higher, particularly on the West Shore. And you see some of these volumes up to 80% of homes as vacant or not primary residences. And again, that has a significant effect that if 1% change in usage of second homes of those 25,000 homes would mean 500, 600 people, just a 1% change. And so again, that would have a significant feeling of people that aren't going to show up in your census. They're not going to show up in your visitation data. They wouldn't be paying TOT, but they're here and they're on the beaches, they're on the roadways. And so again, that certainly is part of the answer of why it felt a little bit busier. Next slide, please. The other thing that we're seeing in some of the data that we have is that, historically, traffic volumes on Highway 50 going south, most of that traffic would come into the region and go to South Shore casinos and go into South Lake Tahoe. But we've seen a 30% drop from peak volumes in that the number of vehicles going south on Highway 50. We've also at the same time seen a 50% increase in the number of vehicles going north on Highway 50, to Secret Harbor, to, all the way up to Incline and to the East Shore. And, in some of the data that we have, we're also seeing a significant change in terms of the number of trips ending in some of those corridors. Again, the volumes are not that big, 200 to 300 trips ending in the corridor just south of Sand Harbor. But that's where we're seeing those increases in roadside parking and increases. And again, these numbers aren't comparable. We're talking about 7,000 vehicles going north and 30,000 vehicles on the south. So it's not really a one-to-one thing, but we're definitely seeing an increase in traffic going north on the East Shore. Next slide, please. The other significant pattern shift, this is just to look at Sand Harbor and the visits to Sand Harbor. And again, what we saw during COVID is that we had record visitation to Sand Harbor during 2020. And the bulk of that was actually driven by non-peak season visits. So outside of June, July, and August. You see that in the blue here. 2021 was actually on track to surpass those volumes, but then we had the Caldor fire, and because of closures related to Caldor, 2021 ended up well below. But then we dropped again into 2022, and so one of the things that again, there's no question that the COVID peaks were here, and that we definitely had higher visitation. We definitely had higher usage of our second homes and work from home and work from Tahoe experiences. But most of the data seem to be pointing to the fact that that those volumes were still below peak volumes of kind of the early 2000s. And two, that most of those areas seem to have subsided over the last couple of years. Next slide, please. Again, the other thing that we're seeing, and I mentioned this in terms of the changes in behavior, is that this is looking at weekend trips ending at Sand Harbor. And you can see in the red, trips are ending earlier. People are getting there earlier than they used to. And again, I think this is directly representative of parking lots filling up earlier and people trying to get ahead of that and trying to get those spaces. And what you see also is this sort of double peak in the afternoon. And so you kind of have things, maybe kind of the late morning, midday lull, and then a recovery of trips as the parking lots reopen, if they're full during the day on the weekends. Next slide, please. Finally, just one other example of what we're seeing in terms of a pattern shift is in the past, if you go back to the kind of late 80s, early 90s, for every 100 vehicles that came into the region, we would have 120 vehicles pass through the casino corridors on the North Shore and South Shore. Today, it's half that. So for every 100 vehicles coming in, we get 60 trips through the casino corridors on the North Shore and South Shore. But the volumes, like we showed earlier, are roughly about the same. And so what we see is people are going different places. And again, it's no surprise, but they're not going and parking at those large parking lots at the casinos and staying there all day. They're going out and experiencing outdoor recreation. They're going to our beaches. They're going to our trailheads. They're going skiing in the winter. And so really what we're seeing is a significant shift. And again, when we look at, what this agency is doing in terms of our strategic priorities, it's really about better accommodating those trips and making sure that we have infrastructure in place at those recreation facilities in our corridors to support these uses that have significantly shifted from what they used to be. And that's really, what we're looking at, because again, as we look at, maybe just to recap, regional population hasn't changed in the last 10 years and is well down from our peaks. Our employment is down 20% from peak and continues to drop. Casino employment is significantly down. So it's not more people, it's that people are going different places and they're recreating in different ways. And we need to catch up our facilities and our infrastructure with what people are doing when they're here. It's really more of a question of managing those behaviors more so than capacity. Yes.
On the employment angle, do you know if you're looking at positions that are available for employment versus people that are filling those positions? Because there was certainly an exodus of folks from the food and beverage industry during COVID, and they haven't come back. There's a lot of vacancy in the restaurant industry. So which are you counting there?
So the data that we're looking at here is the actual employment numbers. So there definitely is, job vacancies out there that are affecting those numbers as well. The employment data that we showed was just actual employment. And I definitely think, there's more to be told and to investigate in terms of the different sectors and different pieces of that employment. But overall, certainly it's casino employment. And I think, there's more to study in terms of, is that coming back? And again, part of the reason that that we're pulling together this information is we are starting to kick off our regional transportation plan and the modeling and analysis necessary to estimate VMT and to forecast. The regional transportation plan will be looking at a horizon of 2040 and 2050. And so we will be projecting out employment, population, and all the other factors, school enrollment, et cetera, for those forecast periods. And so that's what we'll be working on over the next few months. And we'll come back to you with those estimates and our assumptions in terms of what will go into the regional transportation plan and our modeling related to that. And we'll certainly be investigating employment as one of those factors. Next slide, please. So just to close out, I just want to thank my team for helping corral a lot of this information and develop some really great interactive tools that allow us to investigate this information even more. So there's some links here. We created an open data page, and all of the census data that we reviewed and tons more are available through that portal. There's also a detailed census report for the region and a detailed congestion report for the region that are available at those links that go into each sector, goes into travel times by each season, and definitely recommend investigating those if you have questions. But next slide is just be happy to take any questions that we haven't covered.
Great, thanks, Ken. Very interesting. APC members, Mr. Drew.
Yeah, a couple things, Ken. Thank you. This is I'd seen some of these slides before, but good to see them again. Interesting information. There's a couple of things that jump out. One is I think we really need to moving forward be able to differentiate and separate some of the macro data from some of the micro data and understand what those two things look like differently. As an example, population growth, you can look at that regionally, But the bottom line is, if you look at the numbers for the east side of Placer County and El Dorado County and the Truckee Meadows, it looks very different than if you look at those areas countywide or even in more regional perspectives. The bottom line is the population of both Nevada and California has grown substantially, but the areas adjacent to the Lake Tahoe Basin have grown substantially faster than some of the more macro trends. And those have direct impacts on what's happening for both the travelers and employment related items. The way that people have also traveled has changed. You know, the number of people per car would be a really interesting data point to have. It's very difficult to obtain, but there are places in the country that have started to look at that. And what they're seeing is that some of those transportation changes is there's more people per vehicle. So you may have trips go down and the number of people actually go up. And so that kind of data becomes really important for a place like Tahoe, because the bottom line is Tahoe is never going to grow. We can't get any physically bigger than we are. We've done a good job of increasing the number of trails and access points. But the reality is, if you look at from 1990 to now, population change differences and the activities that people want to do, we're never going to get there. There's never going to be enough beaches. There's never going to be enough trails simply for the amount of people that exist. All you have to do is drive down past Folsom and look to your left and the 35,000 houses that are going to be built and the amount of people that are going to be in those houses, and relate that to every time it hits 100 degrees and where those people are going. We just fundamentally have an issue of we can't increase the area of Tahoe. We can certainly manage it and encourage people to disperse and use it at different times and in different ways, but there's a limitation to what we can do from a management perspective, to just the sheer perspective of there's more people than there are places for them to go. And, you know, we're not the only destination community feeling that, but I think it's going to be really important to look at some of those, the macro numbers and the micro numbers and the relationship between them for the data that we can get, because it may inform the kinds of management decisions that we want to make. And the other thing is that what I didn't hear, and you may have considered this, is the change in how people are interacting with Tahoe is a direct related to how we're marketing Tahoe. We're encouraging people to use all of the outdoor recreation amenities that we have. We didn't do that 20 years ago. And so fundamentally, they're going to where we're directing them. And it would be really interesting to look at, you know, to get with LTVA and others about the marketing dollars spent, the way in which we're interacting with those both inside and outside the basin, and then compare that to trailhead numbers, you know, user numbers from trails, parking lots, because, you know, I think those marketing campaigns are clearly working. I mean, it's not just that we're having more people, it's also their behavior shifts, as you mentioned, affect all of those things. And I'm not sure that we're there yet on the policy and management side to figure out how we're going to handle that. Thanks.
Thanks, Jason. Yeah, a lot of the destination stewardship stuff is looking at that last piece of what you just talked about. So interesting. Other members in the room here? Comments?
I would just say, oh, sorry.
Crystal,
did
then
I-
Ellery. Yeah, go ahead.
Did I interrupt?
Nope.
Great presentation. I really appreciate the data. And super, super interesting on so many different levels. In terms of people, shifting to recreation rather than casinos, I mean, I kind of like that, right? I like to see that people are perhaps being more active. And so I think it comes down to like, how do we manage that, right? But the data is great to show that really is happening. I mean, I know in the places that I like to visit, it's incredible how many more folks are on those trails, right? And it can be frustrating at times, but then in my head, I'm like, well, at least they're being active, right? And they're out. And so I think, looking at one of the things that strikes me is the decrease in population, well, the stability really over the last 10 years, but decrease before that. and the loss of jobs, and how do we, what can we do to bring back the locals, right? Because the locals, if tourism continues to increase, whether it be day visitors or overnight visitors, but our employees or locals, those folks that are serving those tourists are declining, at what point do we have a problem where we don't have, businesses are going out of business, right? Because they don't have anybody to serve that demand. And so I think focusing on that, yeah, maybe, we don't have the ability to, construct a lot more housing, right, in the basin, but how can we think strategically about putting programs or projects forward to shift that, to have a shift in that trend to where, the housing stock can go towards locals, right? And we can try to encourage bringing back in the locals. I mean, we have seen, I think, a part of that employment decrease is our local employees have left town because they can't afford it. So it does speak to me about, it's a lot about housing costs and the ability for locals to even live in the region. And so and that's what we're doing in Placer County, is really trying to put our energy around how can we preserve the housing stock for locals. So that's just one of my thoughts.
Thanks. Yeah.
Sorry, just to add, I mean, I think that, again, that, the reason we wanted to do this presentation again is both to set up the regional transportation plan, but also to show these connections between our strategic priorities of transportation, destination stewardship, housing and workforce housing. And, I think it's definitely intentional in those areas.
Valerie?
Thanks, Mr. Chair. I agree. This is very valuable information, and I'm happy to be the recipient of it. And I'm wondering what other plans may be in place to share this information with other groups. In my mind, I'm thinking the TISC for the Environmental Improvement Program. I noticed that a lot of your examples tended to be on the Nevada side of the lake, the SR 28 corridor, Sand Harbor, Incline Village. And there are a lot of planning efforts underway to address visitation along the corridor, and then also to enhance the recreation facilities at our state park units. So I think this information would be really helpful to them as they continue in their planning efforts.
Yeah, so I've given this presentation to the TRPA governing board as well as the CEO roundtable that the chamber hosts, and a couple of different other opportunities, and we're happy to bring it on the road and share this information. Again, all of the detail behind this is available on our site today, and happy to share this.
Thanks. Anyone else in the room? Kevin?
Great presentation, Dan. I mean, fascinating on a lot of levels. One question that jumps out for me is, do you, on a more of a micro level, do you have any data splitting out the number of employees in the Tahoe Basin or commuting who don't live in the Tahoe Basin, inward commuters? What percentage of the workforce, what percentage of the jobs, or total number?
Yeah. So again, the American Community Survey that will be out next week will have updated information about commute patterns, but it is a 5-year average. And so we do expect to have some shift there. That's one of the areas that we're, where the research is lacking, where we would like to have better information. As I mentioned, we're reaching out to local employers to see if we can get better information about where their employees live and commute from. We do have some big data tools that use cell phone information, and we've explored some of it. One of the things that we're trying to reconcile is with the loss of casino employment, generally what people often talk about is people not being able to afford to live in the basin, and therefore they move to the valley and commute back. But with the loss of jobs, there's some question as to whether they're actually commuting back or whether they're leaving and getting jobs there and not coming back at all. And, and so that's a trend that we're trying to better understand. But then you also have the larger macro trends of work from home and other, commute patterns that have changed significantly. And so, when we look at even the work commute in the region, what used to be a spike around 7 a.m. and then a 4 p.m., return home is really, between 7 and 9 a.m. now, and between 3 p.m. and 5 p.m. going home, and more trips going elsewhere than going directly home. And so we're starting to see just changes in the way that, with more flexibility in the workplace, changes in when people work and where they work and how they work. And so it's really hard to pick all of that up and differentiate between what is somebody that used to commute that or used to live here that now commutes versus all of these other patterns. And so trying to figure that out, I think is an area that we're investigating.
It's Kevin, we can probably go back and see what our assumptions were in the 2020 RTP. But so this is just anecdotal, but I know in this agency, 25% of the employees commute from outside the basin. And I would imagine that's probably typical.
Yeah. And it certainly depends on the types of jobs. Yeah. Thanks.
Thanks, Kevin. Last call in the room. Okay, online, I'm gonna go to Mr. Young first.
Hello, everybody. Thank you. I want to say thanks to TRPA for always trying to keep us on a science-based track, to always help us make decisions based on data and numbers and what the best available data is. So thank you for that. I think all of us really appreciate this data, and it's already causing us to have more questions, which is the best thing about a data presentation. So it's all really good. It's helping me validate. I think the word I'm looking for is it does begin to validate some of our feelings here. The idea that every home here in the Truckee Meadows and every home there in Folsom that's going to be sold is going to come with a brochure that talks about proximity to Tahoe. Tens of thousands of new homes, every one of them is sold, at least in part, based on the idea of access and proximity to Lake Tahoe, not for your ability to go to Tahoe and participate in gaming, but specifically to be able to go to Tahoe and enjoy outdoor recreation. That is in every single brochure. And it's beginning to show, the data shows that some of the impact of that. It makes me go to some of the questions others had about local employment and is it coming back? Well, I already know, working with some of the redevelopment efforts there in Crystal Bay, we have enormous opportunity to do exactly what the regional plan wants us all to do in terms of environmental redevelopment. Significant opportunities to do that. Very exciting ideas. The number one barrier to all of it is finding employees. It doesn't matter how difficult the red tape is with the county. It doesn't matter how frustrating we can be to work with. Their number one concern in order to make their projects actually happen is that they cannot find anybody to work there because nobody can live there and nobody can afford to commute. We took action last month on that issue. And now when we have data like this, it helps us understand that. It helps us validate that. It helps us ask better, more specific questions about it. So for me, and I think a lot in this room, the validation and the ability to ask better questions is extremely valuable. And so thank you for that. I do have, based on my experience of having made this mistake, I want to bring something up. In the very beginning of the presentation, it was framed a little bit in the context of what we're hearing from residents and what we're hearing from the community and how we try and explain that. And that the data doesn't really show what we're always hearing. That's important for us to know. That's important for everybody to know. But please don't make the mistake going forward when you're talking to community members, when you're talking to other people in the basin, of accidentally invalidating their feelings and their emotions and their experiences. Please be extremely careful with how you frame these presentations and how you frame this entire project to make sure that you don't accidentally cause somebody to feel like you're telling them their feelings and their experiences are somehow wrong or invalid. I know you don't want to go there. I know you're not, I know you've probably already thought that, and I kind of feel like I heard a little bit of that in your presentation. I feel like I heard a little bit of that concern coming through. But I want to bring it up publicly. I want to ask you directly to be extremely thoughtful in how this information is presented going forward so that we don't accidentally shoot ourselves in the foot by causing community members to feel like we're telling them their feelings and their experiences are somehow not real. So thank you very much for being science-based. Thank you very much for always bringing us data to help us do a better job. And let's be very thoughtful about how we talk about it to the community. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Eric. Ken, do you want to respond to any of that?
No, just thank you.
Yep. Ms. Simon.
Yes, I think I would like to first associate myself with Eric's remarks about the feeling of sitting in traffic for 4 hours for what used to be a 20-minute drive and that sort of thing. So people do have these real life experiences. So wait a minute. So we'll lower your hand. Oh, okay. That's kind of my point that I'm going to make because the computer is going to lower my hand. So one of the things that you might be able to tease out of the gaming stuff and the employment there is the use of computers. You know, that was not so rampant 10 or 15 years ago. And also in restaurants that have gone to computer-based things like open tables so that you don't talk to a hostess or anything like that. So that's just something to kind of see if you can tease that out somehow. I do think that the social media has had a tremendous effect on patterns so that when the spring flowers bloom, everybody heads there and they all know about it. And also in, you know, the different trails and what's going on there. You know, we now have a sign, I guess, up in the on Highway 431 showing where Chickadee Ridge is. So the chickadees will be very well fed. And then another point, when you look at the demographics, we do have an aging population in the United States. So it's not surprising that that's reflected in your population statistics. So demographically, I think I heard this on NPR or someplace, 10,000 people in the United States turn 65 each day. So so that's going to really be a factor, and a factor not only on the people being able to travel, but people being able to stay here and age in place when we have so few services for assisted living or senior, not senior programs, but senior help. That's true really all over, and the Basin and Reno and Northern California are no exceptions. Thanks.
Thank you, Judy. Ms. Chandler.
Yeah, I'm very sorry. My computer just went out for a minute. So Ken, wonderful presentation, but I do have two questions. The first question is, was there any consideration to undocumented workers, illegals, and how that would affect the data that you presented? And my other question had to do with the chart that dealt with water use in the basin and whether or not any consideration was given to drought, watering restrictions, fires, evacuation. Thank you.
In terms of the employment, we're using data from the Census Bureau zip code data report. I don't know how that report treats illegal workers. My guess is it does not, but we'd have to investigate that further. I think it's payroll employment, so I'm guessing it would be anything under the table wouldn't be counted. In terms of water use, the drop, we definitely see in the data some of the efficiency improvements where you can see, like the average water use per connection decreasing, which I think is indicative of the those conservation measures. But the drops that we're seeing in terms of overall water use is exceeds just those efficiency improvements and the per connection drops. So I think it does show a larger reduced use of water versus just conservation efforts. I think it is important, though, to note in the 2021 data, the water that was used to fight the Caldor fire would have been included within the STPUD and other agencies that used water for the firefight would have been included within their numbers. So the fact that 2021 dropped from 2020. Actually, sorry, I think water use was up in 2021.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Thanks, Susan. Kevin?
One follow-up question. We have 2 seasons in Tahoe, snow removal and road construction. We all know that. And I think you pointed to the data suggesting that road construction has a lot to do with travel times and whatnot. And I can tell you, I experienced it. The summer was legendary in North Lake Tahoe. I mean, been here 20 years and it was legendary. Has there been any effort, and this is maybe more of a question, not for Dan, but for those around the table, interagency coordination around construction projects or even strategic conversations about how this work is done? I know that there's efficiencies found, multiple projects getting done at one time, undergrounding of utilities, things like that. But is there any way we can get off the flywheel of every summer repaving what seems to be the same sections of road, or at least staggering them so that it's less painful for people who are visiting and trying to get around the basin to go hiking? There's not an easy answer. I'm just kind of curious from those who represent jurisdictions here, if we're doing anything to really try to mitigate the impacts of construction when we have our peak visitation.
I think we do that through coordination meetings, but it's far from perfect. And oftentimes we're dealing with when funding becomes available and when environmental documents are certified, and when workloads are balanced enough to say that this is now the priority project. But you're right, it happens all the time. We pave a road and then they come in and replace all the gas meters. We meet with, Southwest Gas constantly, Liberty Utilities, trying to coordinate all that. It's not perfect. We do pull it off occasionally. Utilities go underground. The next year we come in and repave. It's beautiful. We had a problem on Fallen Leaf Lake this summer where Liberty came in and closed the road and didn't tell anyone. And we flagged it immediately and it turned into a crisis. So it still happens. But yeah.
Yeah, for Placercon, I would just echo that. There is coordination. It's a limited season, right? Time that you can do improvements, and oftentimes those improvements projects just stack up on one another, literally like, geographically, right? And with the timing. So it's a constant challenge. And even when it's happening, the coordination even gets, I would say, tighter, right? Because we're addressing, the angry calls we're getting, and so it's a constant, it's a constant struggle, really, to keep up on that.
One thing to note on this, and this is something everyone can do, the single biggest impact on that is low bid contracting that we force local governments to use. If they were allowed to use best value and have more opportunity on selection of contractors, it would provide tremendous value to local jurisdictions to be able to do more coordination. Because right now, as it works, when projects are bid, unless there's a legal issue, the low bid contractor is selected. And so you have times where you can have 3 projects that have been coordinated and 3 agencies have to pick 3 different contractors.
All right. Thanks all. It's good. Let's move us on because it's almost 11. Let's go to public comment. So again, to participate in the meeting, go to trpa.gov, click on APC meeting December 6th. There you'll find a link to our webinar. And if any member of the public in the room would like to comment, please come to the podium and then we'll take online comments. Ms. Waller.
Good morning, Ellie Waller. Thank you, Ken, for the American Community update and what that 5-year data may change in all our planning documents going forward. Lots of conundrums we're hearing in the room of things to address, trying to manage. I started in Tahoe in my 40s. I'm in my 60s. So I'm part of that aging demographic that tries to stay put in the region. There's also not just finding employees, it's keeping them. Each jurisdiction has different levels of employment payment, and we lose good people to different states, comes back and forth. Just lots of conundrums with short-term rentals and how we look at them. When is it high season, when the people are feeling more compacted in their local neighborhoods? Just the general impacts that should be analyzed a little more specifically with those short-term rentals. We have an event center now. We're going to get a hockey team. What is that going to do to South Shore? With a schedule now published starting next year in 2024 with 36 home events starting in October. So our shoulder seasons now don't look like shoulder seasons anymore. Again, we're all discussing different ways to look at this data and how the general public that lives there, the general public that commutes. I listened to an update from the airport the Reno Regional Airport yesterday. They're expanding their market. They're talking about, gosh, why don't we have direct flights to Hawaii? Bring those people back in also. So there's lots of things that lend not just to the specific data in Tahoe. I'm back to the regional issues again, and technology has changed our lives. COVID has changed our lives. Thank you.
Thanks, Ellie. Other public comment in the room? Okay, seeing none, let's go online. Thanks, Catherine. Looks like we have one hand raised online.
The hand raise is Yolanda Knack. Yolanda, if you unmute, you can address the commission.
Hi, Yolanda Knack. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
Yes, I'm an Incline Village resident. The first thing that's the most important, and then I'll go over with you why the data is flawed. And by the way, I did send an email. I hope you look at that. This is all information that's different from my email. So you've got to, there's no evaluation of the South Lake Tahoe evacuation when they had the Caldor fire. There's no evaluation of the Hawaii fire. There's no evaluation of the Paradise fire. These are really serious issues. Evacuating us on a 2-lane road, which can't be widened. You know, this is not, I'm not the only one. Our community is, I mean, we've had meetings about this, you know, how are we going to evacuate? And to be quite honest with you, even though like they're working on plans and stuff, the bottom line is there are 3 exits to Incline Village. And if one is blocked, that leaves 2 exits. And I don't know if you watched the videos of South Lake Tahoe exiting. They actually had 3 exits and it was like a parking lot. I think that, you know, you don't think we're, you're just not taking this into consideration. These are our lives that you're talking about, or I'm talking about. We want to be able to get out. And so, so then back to the data being flawed. You know, some people up here actually work in Reno or Carson City. Schools, you're not taking into consideration that Nevada schools are dead last in the nation, 50th, 50 out of 50. And some people actually go to private schools in, I mean, some are private schools here, but also in Reno and Carson City. There was one private school here and they couldn't afford the rent. So they moved to Carson City and the students continued with them. The other thing is last few years, there's been tons of parking on 28, all the way from Incline Village to 50, or at least up towards 50. And people were like walking on 28. It was totally dangerous. Now they're starting to make that no parking, and they're starting to build a bigger parking lot there at Chimney Beach. But so I'm not sure all that was taken into consideration. Also, if we are not a congested area, I want my money back from the animal control. They say that all congested areas have to have your dogs licensed. And so I have my dogs licensed, but if we're not a congested area, like I say, I want my money back. And
Yolanda, can I ask you to wrap up your comments, please?
Sure. I don't think we're congested, to be quite honest with you. It's just that if we had to evacuate, and I think the other thing is because of the fires, NV Energy has spent a lot more time trimming the trees around the power lines. Plus there's multi-year contracts going in developments going in Crystal Bay, here in Incline Village, and that's going to affect us, our traffic even worse. I think that you know, IVGID has their.
I'm gonna ask you again, please. Your time has been up for quite a while. If you could just have one finishing statement, that would be great.
Okay. So bottom line is we need to be able to evacuate, and as it is, I'm not even sure we could get out alive. Thank you.
Thank you for your comment.
And Mr. Chair, there are no other hands raised to comment on this item.
All right, thanks, Catherine. Final thoughts, Steve?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. One thing I think that we could add in there, Ken, on some of this data is the transit ridership. That's not reflected anymore. We're just talking about cars. And I think, you know, the broader picture is transit and other forms of mobility. Thank you.
Thanks, Steve.
I have one more.
Yeah.
One more comment if I
Yeah.
can. I just want to say I appreciate the comments from the public and understand, you know, people's fear and particularly around evacuation. And, you know, I know from our emergency responders and planners, we have been actually testing methodology around evacuation. And I understand looking at, you know, they have been looking at lessons learned, right, from Caldor, from Paradise, and in fact have modified the methods, I think, from in particular Paradise. And I think even the evacuation for the Caldor, they had looked at what happened in Paradise, right? And changed their methodology to make sure folks were out, which happened, right? The entire city was evacuated, I think, right? So I would just say, I think it's ever evolving, in terms of evacuation is what I'm hearing. I would also just ask, we have done a recent town hall meeting or workshop on evacuation. That was super, super helpful, I think, for the community to really understand what happens in an event like that. And it really does, I think it's insightful because everything changes, right? How they're coordinating the mutual aid that they work on, and methodology, how they're constantly analyzing methodology and making changes and adjustments. So I don't know, that's something that could happen here at APC where, you could pull together folks and do some kind of presentation on that might be good. And then one other point, on the comment about the flawed data, I would just ask, we're always, I think you are too, like looking, where do you get the right data? So if the data is flawed, that's an important comment, I think, to hear. It's, if it is flawed, how is it flawed? And would look for folks, to suggest other data sources, right? And I'm speaking kind of to the public right now. If it is flawed, how so? I think we want to know that. And where do we go to get data that wouldn't be flawed? So those are my comments.
Yeah, and maybe I'll just echo that as representatives of our local jurisdictions, if you have data that you can share with us that would help inform, as we go into the modeling effort for our regional transportation plan and forecasts, please let us know because we would definitely be interested in that. We already consume a lot of the information related to TOT and related to occupancy and other things, but we are absolutely open, as Crystal said, to any data sources. And again, what we're trying to do through this presentation was because we don't have population data, to look at other data that may be a proxy. And if we're missing something, we definitely want to bring that into the fold.
Crystal, to respond to your first comment, we actually, I think it was in October, had the Tahoe Fire and Fuels team, the MAC, the Fire Pit. MAC is multi-agency coordinating committee. Fire Pit is the fire public information team. And I believe we had law enforcement and fire officials from all over the basin give the governing board a report on what all they were doing. And governing board members said specifically, what can TRPA do? And they said two things. One is prioritize thinning around evacuation routes, and the other one is a better ITS system, especially to reach those people who are hard to reach. And we've submitted a grant to go after those things to do that. So we are working on it. And if the APC would like to have some of that information on a future agenda, we'd be happy to do that.
It's wonderful. Thank you.
Yeah, I think we'd appreciate that. Yeah, thanks for your comments, Crystal. Those are great. Okay, I think we're done. That was informational. Thanks a lot, Ken. Really appreciate it. Okay, I'm going to move us on to item 6, planning matters. Item 6A is economic sustainability and housing amendments to Placer County's Tahoe Basin Area Plan. Information on this item can be found on page 7 of your packet. And we have Jacob Stock from TRPA and other Placer County staff coming up to present on this item, including Crystal, changing hats.
Mr. Chair, APC members, my name is Jacob Stock, Senior Planner with TRPA. I'm here to introduce the amendments to Placer County's Tahoe Basin Area Plan. And I think it's really great that we're coming on after Ken's presentation, that economic travel pattern, local employment context. It's really the context that we and our partners like Placer County are working in to try to adapt our policies and plans to respond to current conditions. So county staff have developed both policy and implementing code changes aimed at adapting the area plan to achieve housing and economic development goals initially envisioned when the plan was adopted in 2017. So building on years of study, these amendments aim to provide a systemic approach to encourage desired investment in environmentally and economically beneficial redevelopment and workforce housing. So county staff, we have Crystal and Stacy here will provide a detailed summary of the amendment package in their presentation. I would just like to add that after reviewing the proposal, the IEC conformance documents findings, TRPA staff have determined that the proposed amendments are in conformance with the regional plan and will not result in significant environmental effects. And in some areas, due to encouraging environmentally beneficial redevelopment, some of these amendments could actually have a beneficial impact. So following the presentation, staff seeks APC discussion on this item and asks that the commission consider a recommendation to the governing board. Thanks.
Am I on? Can you hear me? Thank you, Jacob. Good morning, Chairman and Commissioners. Happy to be here today. Crystal Jacobson with Placer County, and with me is Stacy Wydra. She's a principal planner out of our Tahoe City office. This item, as Jacob mentioned, is a county-initiated amendment package to our Tahoe Basin Area Plan. And this package includes revisions that are aimed at promoting and encouraging economic sustainability, mostly in our town centers, and then also the production of housing, workforce housing. So the Tahoe Basin Area Plan was initially adopted by our board and by TRPA Governing Board back in January 2017. And we have been sort of adaptively managing it since then. There was a set of housing related amendments that came forward, I think about a year ago or so, maybe 2 years ago, that really specifically looked at housing amendments. These do that too, but they're also focused on some town center amendments. So we're always looking for opportunity to make change where change is needed. And, you know, we track areas of the code that are problematic. So I'll talk a little bit more about that and the why behind this package in a second here. Next slide. So this effort, actually, this amendment package initiated in mid 2021. There's been a lot of public outreach as part of this effort, including public meetings, workshops, hearings, and I actually have a slide to sort of demonstrate that here in a second. We have prepared environmental analysis. As Jacob mentioned, we've done the IEC for TRPA. We've also prepared a CEQA addendum to the 2017 EIR-EIS that was prepared for the Tahoe Basin Area Plan. There's also an errata to the CEQA addendum that addressed cumulative analysis. So a lot of environmental analysis has been done. And then we have also prepared an implementation report, which I believe was emailed out to you just recently. That was prepared for as this goes forward before the governing board. We wanted to make sure we had that. And that was in response to some comments that we had received. And then on October 16th, our board conducted a hearing to consider the amendment package. They were here in the Tahoe area. They took significant comment. They had about 3 hours or so, maybe longer, of public comment on it. We received a lot of comments. The board closed that hearing to allow staff time to review the comment and respond to it. And then they opened back up the hearing on the 31st of October down in our Auburn office and actually adopted the plan. And so as part of that sort of response to comments between the 16th when we were at our board and the 31st, we actually prepared written responses. And that was also, I believe, forwarded out to the group here. So what we did is we went through that, we sifted through the comments and identified key topics or themes, and then provided some response there. And we're prepared today to answer any questions about that. Next slide. So this just demonstrates the outreach. So again, it started in 2021 where we were meeting with some key stakeholders, business owners, folks that were, land use planners, folks that use the code a lot to find out, where are the areas of the code that are problematic. But then the actual outreach strategy in terms of public meetings started in 2022, you'll see here. So we had planning commission workshops, we held town halls, we were meeting with the business associations, resort associations, all types of folks trying to get some input, including the TRPA Regional Plan Implementation Committee. We did a workshop there. So you'll see all of that outreach here. In 2022, in December, the December 8th date that you see there, we did go before our planning commission. That was, we were wanting an action, actually. We had a proposal for the commission to forward an action of approval to our board. At that time, our commission wanted us to do a little bit more work. They said, go do some more outreach, do some more analysis on the CEQA side. And so we did just that. We held more meetings in 2023, you'll see. We also prepared the addendum. We did it in errata that's related to cumulative. So a lot of work has been done since that hearing that was held in December of 2022. So then our planning commission met in August. You'll see there, August 10th, they did forward a recommendation to the board. However, they asked us to look at the cumulatives. That's when we did that. And then we also prepared the implementation report. So even after the planning commission took action, a lot of work has been done since then. So that brings us to where we are today. I did want to point out, I think the RPIC hearing and the governing board hearing have been pushed out to 2024. So I want to make sure folks notice that, because I think we're intending to go soon to RPIC, and so that date has changed. So I want to make sure I touch on that. So next slide. So I do want to point out, these amendments are really a result of years of feedback. So we have heard from folks about the lack of reinvestment or redevelopment in our town centers. So again, the area plan was adopted in 2017. I think our board, when we adopted that plan, we got the increased height and density in town centers. We're trying to shift redevelopment into the town centers to meet the regional plan goal of, doing that. Our board, I think, was really hoping to see reinvestment in our town centers. We have spent a lot of public dollars in our town centers on, streetscape improvements, water quality improvements. And so they were hoping that that same kind of reinvestment would come forward on the private side, right? So we've put in lots of funding into reinvestment and environmental improvement on the public side. Our board was hoping to see that same kind of reinvestment on the private side with private lots, so that we could further the goals of the regional plan. Since then, though, we have not seen a lot of that. So really nothing has happened. We have projects that are in the hopper, no doubt. You probably have seen or heard from the community about that there's a lot of, projects happening in the North Tahoe or North Lake Tahoe area, but they are stalled out. They're not moving forward. And so we really haven't seen a lot of redevelopment and reinvestment in our town centers that I think our board was hoping to see. And so there was an economic study. After hearing from all these folks that you'll see here on the slide, there was an economic study that was prepared by our county executive office in 2020 to take a look at that, the problem, right? We're not getting the reinvestment and why. And so that study resulted in some key sort of recommended actions that the county can take. And one of them was for our staff to look at the Tahoe Basin Area Plan and see if there was room for some change. So that is the why. That's why we're here today. These amendments are really minor in nature, and we'll kind of walk you through that in a minute here, but they are intended to hopefully move the needle. We're not sure that it will work, but we're going to keep trying, right? We see this as adaptive management. If you're not achieving the goals of the TBAP and the goals of the regional plan, we feel we are responsible to address that, right? Look at the problem and see if we can make small changes to hopefully move the needle. Next slide. So I want to touch on kind of what they do, but really quick, I wanted to just remind folks for the Tahoe area, the TBAP, Tahoe Basin Area Plan, covers the entire basin area of Placer County, and it's 2 documents. So we've got a policy document, and then we have what we call implementing regulations, which really serves as the zoning ordinance for our Tahoe area in Placer County. So think of that as we move forward and talk about what the amendments are. So what they do, they really are aimed at helping small businesses, entrepreneurs, and startups in Placer County, mostly in the town centers of Kings Beach and Tahoe City. There are some area-wide amendments that we'll touch on, but most of the amendments are geared at really shifting the development into the town centers and focusing land use intensity there, as was, sort of the goal, right, of the TBAP and the regional plan. So the amendments comply with SB 946 to legalize sidewalk vending, clarify mobile food truck requirements. So the idea is, people come in with mobile vending uses, they do a few things, and food trucks. They create some vibrancy, we think, in the town centers, but they also are a way for folks to start up a business. So we added that. Streamlining new small-scale hotels, restaurants, retail, and other local serving land uses. We'll touch on this more. Stacey will get to this in a minute, but we have sort of backed into a VMT thresholds and are trying to incentivizing uses that come in that screen out under the threshold so that we can promote small business in our town centers. Enhancing compatibility between mixed-use commercial zone districts and adjacent residential zone districts. So we looked at setbacks and building articulation and things like that to enhance compatibility. And then increase creative solutions to address parking, transit, and mobility needs in projects in town centers. We're working on a parking management program in our county, looking at our town centers. We're hoping to go to paid parking systems and better manage the parking that we have. And so we looked at our code to see if we needed to make some changes in parking. And it's kind of tied to transit and mobility, and we'll touch on that too. And then for workforce housing, the amendments help to really promote the construction of workforce housing by streamlining the permitting of deed restricted workforce. So you're going to see in the amendments that Stacey will walk through where we have an allowance for workforce housing to be constructed by right without a use permit, so long as they're deed restricted, 100% deed restricted. So we're really, again, trying to move the needle on getting the construction of workforce housing. And then limiting new single family housing in town centers if they're not deed restricted for workforce housing. So that's a concern in the community is, we need to save the town centers for commercial. We don't want to see single family uses in town centers. So we did that. And then also clarifying requirements for tiny homes. We see tiny homes as, they're sort of like affordable by design. And so that's included in this package. We're pretty excited about that. That's something we're doing countywide. And so that's included. Next slide. I do want to talk about what they don't do, because there's a lot of, I'm sure your inboxes were probably flooded, as was mine, and a lot of comments about what these amendments are doing. So I want to touch on that. We are not proposing to increase any density standards. So units per acre, whether they be tourist accommodation units per acre, residential units per acre, we're not making changes there. And that's important to note that the build out, right, that the sort of carrying capacity that was analyzed in our TBAP in 2017 has not changed. We're bound by TRPA growth control limits. The TBAP build out has not changed. So the overall density, how many units on each lot, those requirements remain the same. There is concern, I would say, from folks, they think we're increased by, these amendments are going to increase density. I think there's fear that by promoting that redevelopment that we always wanted out of the 2017 plan, by doing that now, making a little changes to help promote it, we might actually realize some of that density that's already in the plan. So I think that sort of the comments that I hear and the fear there, I think is related to that when they are equating that to increased density. But I do want to point out we are not proposing changes there. We're also not increasing building height, so no change proposed from the current TBAP allowance of 56 feet in town centers. You'll see a highlighted note down at the bottom. We had initially proposed height amendments and some building massing amendments. We have removed those from this package I want to be super transparent. We might come in the future with a proposal to look at targeted areas of our town centers that might be appropriate for some increased height, but they are not a part of this amendment package. We have pulled them out. We feel like they need to be studied on their own. So again, we have taken those out. And then again, I touched on this, but the carrying capacity is not increasing. The build out has not changed. The overall development potential is still capped. So that has not changed. That growth control system and that build out that we analyzed in 2017 do not result, this package, these minor refinements don't result in any uses or activities that are then increased, right? Or that would increase wildfire risk or increase VMT traffic, that kind of thing. The amendments also don't conflict with TRPA scenic or environmental thresholds, including traffic and VMT. They do not create a change of circumstances requiring CEQA supplemental analysis. Again, we analyzed at the full extent of density that would be allowed through the TBAP. And we're not changing that density. So the population that would result from those units that are in the basin, allowed in the basin today, under today's code, is not changed. VMT that would be associated, right? That's not changed. So the overall population that could result as part of the density that we have today is not changed. Same thing with traffic VMT. So just wanted to point that out. And then I also want to point out that the amendments are not connected to any specific project and don't result in piecemealing under CEQA. The amendments definitely are, intended to hopefully encourage the redevelopment and the reinvestment that our board wanted to see in our town centers, but this is not tied to any specific project. Next slide. So I put the slide in here because I do think that there's a cost of doing nothing. I think our board feels that way. We have got a lot of aging infrastructure in our town centers. And there's and some of them are county properties. I'm not gonna, I'll just be honest. We've got county properties in Kings Beach with a project that we're trying to move the needle on. And it's, I would say, we've got blighted properties in Kings Beach and the county has some of those. And so we are trying to make a change here. But really in terms of, the cost of doing nothing, if we're not trying to move the needle on getting redevelopment on those sites, we're not getting environmental improvements to help with runoff to the lake, right? So there's also, what the county's trying to do is we're focusing on lodging in our town centers, shifting lodging into the town centers, trying to get the short-term rentals out of the neighborhoods, put them in the town centers where people could walk. By doing that, they're out and about, they're not driving to a restaurant, probably helps with VMT. So really these amendments are intended to help revitalize, redevelop those town centers. And then more congestion, on the housing side, as I had mentioned earlier, we're really trying to focus on how do we keep local workers here so that they're not driving from Carson City or Reno or Auburn. I have staff coming to our offices in Tahoe City that are driving from Roseville. I mean, and so how can we promote the construction of housing, workforce housing, deed restricted housing, to keep these folks local and reduce that drive, right? And then just lack of vibrancy and walkability. I live in Truckee. A lot has happened in Truckee. I don't know if you all go to Truckee, but it's pretty vibrant, right? So what is happening in Truckee that's not happening in Tahoe City and Kings Beach? We're trying to get to the bottom of that. And these amendments are just, we think, like one tool to address that. We think there's a cost of doing nothing. We have town centers that are deteriorating and we're trying to address it. So that's really the why here. Next slide. So what I want to touch on here is just, and I'm going to turn to Stacy to walk through the amendments to the implementing regulations. Those are really the kind of the nuts and bolts. We do have a lot of amendments that are related to the policy document, really adding some policies related to scenic resources, supporting scenic evaluation to direct that private reinvestment into town centers. On vegetation, we have policies supporting home hardening, green waste, defensible space. We feel helps with that, wildfire risk. Socioeconomic, and these are the chapters that you see here on the left. So the chapters of the area plan where there are policies. And so we've added policies related to these topics. Again, land use, mixed use, town center policies, trying to promote that redevelopment and reinvestment in our town centers. Same thing with community design and redevelopment. On housing, again, how policies to support housing. You're going to see one, and you might hear from some folks about one. I just want to touch on really quick. We added a policy about allowing local worker overnight camping in public and private parking lots. This actually was responded to in that response to comments. This came about from the housing community in Tahoe, and advocates that came to us and said, we've got a problem with local workers living out of their cars. It's still happening today. It started becoming really prominent during COVID. But we really had like teachers living out of their cars, and it's problematic, right? We want to construct housing. But so we added this policy in here to potentially develop a program. It's just a policy to explore the development of a program that would go through its own public vetting process. Is there an opportunity for private and private lots and public lots to be used for overnight camping? If there was a program around it that made sure it was secure and things like that. So I know there's comments on that, and I just wanted to touch on that one. So with that, I'm going to turn it to Stacy and let her kind of walk you through the nuts and bolts of the changes to the implementing regulations.
Good morning. Thank you, Crystal. Stacy Wydrow. Thank you. And yeah, so Crystal did basically like the 10,000 foot elevation. I'm going to dive into, the 2,000 foot elevation. How do we get there? What were some of the tweaks that we are proposing in these amendments to actually try and get some movement on the ground? Or, like Crystal said, get some of these small business owners to occupy our boarded up sites in our town centers. So I'm going to start with our actual town centers, and we are looking at allowing small scale uses by right, provided that they screen out for VMT. Again, these are like eating and drinking places. We realized that a zoning clearance was required for an eating and drinking place. So that's a restaurant that we want those in our town centers. So why should someone have to go through a zoning clearance when they could just move in and focus on probably the tenant improvements that need to occur to bring that building up to code, or add a new hood that, probably is very aged. So we really looked at ways that we could help eliminate some of the steps to occupying these boarded up sites. And so again, though, addressing that the BMT, that they still have to screen out. So we specifically in our amendments allocated certain uses and their maximum square footages. So really to help guide the reader through the TBAP, the Tahoe Basin Area Plan, what could be allowed, and would that fit for them? So, and then most of these uses would still require design review. So there would still be a public opportunity, but on a lesser scale and reduced time. So, hoping to, again, to encourage those folks to come in and maybe consider a spot that's been vacant for a couple years. Also, Crystal mentioned food trucks. We're allowing those without a use permit and no design review, but they still, again, have to ensure that they comply with environmental health requirements and cannot be parked in the roadways. And then one item that we actually learned and heard from the public was with regards to real estate offices occupying our ground floor and our frontages of our town centers. And so we looked at that, and we are recommending an amendment to allow for, to not allow for any new real estate offices or property management offices to be on the ground floor frontages. They could be on the rear, the sides, or the second floor, but we really don't want them to dominate. We want more of that vibrancy that Crystal spoke of. We want an eating and drinking place or retail shop. So but we heard that from the public. So we put that in as an amendment. We also are allowing hotels or motels or tourist accommodation units by right, if they're 20 units or less. This would still require design review, so it would, vet out parking and design and other aspects of those uses relative to its design. But also, again, this is sort of what we need to have in our town centers to help balance out what we're experiencing in our residential neighborhoods as well. And then we are recommending an amendment to prohibit new single-family residences along our frontages of our town centers. And then they could be allowed if they're part of a mixed-use project. But again, that would be vetted through that proposal. And then if they are deed restricted, 100%, then we could consider them as being, along the frontage. So again, trying to find that balance of what we need in our community. We know we need housing. We also need vibrant town centers. And then also, accessory to those new single family units that we're proposing not to be allowed along the frontages, that we would also have to prohibit the additional dwelling units that could go along with those single family residences. And then allow multifamily, multi-person employee housing units by right if they're 100% deed restricted to achievable housing. So again, facilitating that kind of use if one would like to build it in our town centers. Next slide, please. So then also we looked at our TBAP and we recognized that there were some areas of where the reader may not understand what all of the requirements would be of them, or we had some inconsistencies between sections and or areas of the code. So we have clarified the streetscape and roadway requirements throughout the document, including the town centers. They weren't in the town centers before. And then we clarified frontage improvements. So this is basically, again, to notify the reader of what would be required of them for development. So and then also to be consistent with our land use development manual, which gives the specifics of, how wide of a sidewalk, how tall of a curb. So again, really just trying to help inform the reader that they could take our TBAP and run with it and know what they needed to do to come in and build something or redevelop something. And then similarly with shore zone requirements, the county recently adopted the Lake Tahoe shore zone ordinance. So we needed to make sure that that was consistent in our TBAP. And then we added language to building lengths. In the Tahoe City area, we realized we did not have a maximum building length in Tahoe City, whereas we did in Kings Beach. So we have added a maximum building length for Tahoe City. Again, just to have some consistency and notify the reader of what would be required. And then decrease the length for commercial buildings adjacent to residential zone districts. This was really intended to ensure compatibility between those two differing zone districts and moving in more to the transition zone. And then building height, as Crystal mentioned, we originally had considered increasing the height from the allowed 56 feet. But hearing from the public, we have opted to remove that from these amendments, and we are sticking with the 56 feet. So we are not changing the building height in our town centers. Rather, we are eliminating in our height section, it allows for 56 feet or 4 stories. And so it really confused the reader, confused the developer. Well, what's a story? How tall is a story? And so we, after, hearing a lot of that confusion, we have opted to just eliminate the 4 stories and keep with the 56 feet, hoping that that will just be very clear for development. And then we removed rear setbacks for our town center lots that are adjacent to residential zones. This was really recognizing our small town center lots that we have and acknowledging that they're not very deep. And so that can lend to, sort of a restriction in development or redevelopment of our town center parcels. But then we also, again, looked at the residential, and residential has a rear yard setback. So they're still maintaining a setback. It's just trying, again, to achieve that balance between the two needs of both those zone districts. And then we are allowing for groundwater interception and then snow storage for projects that aren't otherwise specified today. Next slide, please. So then we looked at other sections of our TBAP, and again, just to really ensure that we are being consistent throughout the document. And in our community service zone districts, we are allowing single family, multifamily, multi-person employee housing to, if they're deed restricted, they would be allowed by right. Allow mobile vending, and then we modified the development standards to encourage affordable housing in the community service zone districts, because we see that there's a compatibility here where that's where we want some work or some folks to live because they work at the community service areas. So, and then in the recreational and tourist zone districts, again, looking where we didn't have employee housing and really encouraging just employee housing to be developed wherever it can be. And also, employee housing near our 64-acre transit center. So that just seemed like we were missing the boat on that one. So we added that we're allowing employee housing in that particular zone district. And then also within the Grand Lebacan zone district, again, provided that these are deed restricted 100%. So then similarly, in our West Shore mixed use zone districts, adding mobile vending, again, just to have that consistency throughout the document. And then with parking, we looked at what's happening with parking and the trends of the state and trends of the region. And we are recommending some amendments to modernize those, reduce those, really look at where parking is, and also hope for some opportunities for flexibility. So in other words, shared using of parking. So for example, if there's a multifamily project that is adjacent to a restaurant, perhaps we could have some shared parking that they can operate, or maybe that's not the best example, but meaning if there's a bank and a restaurant, the bank can, park during the day, but then the restaurant that opens at 5 o'clock can use that same parking that the bank uses during the day. So really just trying to provide some flexibility of our town centers, reducing, an abundance of parking, because then in turn, that also provides, environmental benefits, because then we don't have all that runoff from those paved parking areas. That potentially could run off into the lake. And then we added tiny homes, as Crystal mentioned. And then we recognized that our signage in the TBAP was grossly outdated, and that we had not been kept up with the times of what TRPA was modifying, and which basically meant, every time they changed their sign ordinance, we would have had to update the TBAP. And so instead of having to amend our TBAP all the time, we have just opted to refer to TRPA sign ordinance. So then we're aligned with what is really the vision of TRPA and the region with regards to signage. And then of course, there's always various revisions, cleanups, typos. And so those are also throughout the TBAP. Next slide, please. And then housing related amendments. As Crystal mentioned, we did look at our housing and where, we have in our residential zone districts, there's 14 residential zone districts which have a preferred special policy for affordable housing. But then in the land use table for that residential housing, it required a use permit. So there was really just no incentive, to encourage that special policy or that preferred policy that we have. So we looked at those residential zone districts, and we're recommending an amendment to that land use table to allow those by right if they're deed restricted 100%. So again, finding that balance. And then we also looked at, again, the trends of what's happening with our state, and ADUs require a 4-foot side setback. And so we really looked at what our existing conditions are together with the state trends. And we are proposing some development standard modifications to our residential zone districts. specifically to reducing the minimum lot width. We're encouraging a street side setback. So for corner lots, you know, and I'll use the corner lot as an example. So currently today, you know, a lot of our Kings Beach parcels are 25 feet wide. And if you're on a corner lot, you have 2 front setbacks. Well, the front setback today is 20 feet measured from the property line. So when you apply 2 20-foot front setbacks, your building envelope is very narrow and skinny and really unbuildable. So you could come in for a variance, but that's yet another process, you know, another time, money, application, paperwork. And so we really looked at that and thought, here's an opportunity that we could do a street side setback of 15 feet from the measure, you know, because we also want to make sure we have snow removal, considerations are applied and things like that. But this would then just give a little bit of flexibility and perhaps reduce that requirement for variance. So that was just one example. Next slide, please. And then as Crystal mentioned, we have presented this quite a few times and have received some great public comment along the way. And some of the key topics, as Crystal mentioned, you know, the environmental, we did, you know, hear some thoughts about food trucks and parking, the lake clarity, carrying capacity, piecemealing, wildfire risk, traffic, and VMT. I just read a few of them, but all of which these have, we took those comments into consideration, and then those were also vetted through our environmental review. Next slide, please. And so the environmental review. So the county, we did an addendum and an errata for CEQA, so the California Environmental Quality Act, and it was prepared in compliance with the guidelines of CEQA. And it concluded that none of the conditions described in our CEQA guidelines 15162 called for the preparation of a subsequent EIR. Also, that the proposed amendments would not result in any new or substantially more severe significant impacts than what were identified in the original 2017 area plan EIR. And then the errata, which was prepared as a result of additional public comments that were received, concluded that no alterations to the conclusions of the EIR addendum were found. And so the board did adopt and certify the addendum and the errata for the TBAP amendments. Next slide, please. So then similarly, with TRPA, or, you know, coming before you guys today, we prepared an initial environmental checklist. It was prepared in accordance with the rules of procedure and the code of ordinances. And it found that there was no potential impacts to any of, you know, or no conflicts, I should say, with the rules of procedure or the code of ordinances. And then as a result, we need to make required findings, and those findings were prepared in accordance with the code of ordinances. Next slide, please. And then as such, those findings concluded that there would be no significant effect on the environment. The amendments would be consistent with and would not adversely affect implementation of the regional plan, the applicable goals and policies, community plans, TRPA code, and other TRPA plans and programs. Also, that these amendments would not cause the environmental threshold carrying capacities to be exceeded. The amendments would not change federal, state, or local air and water quality standards applicable to the region. And then the amendments would continue to achieve and maintain the thresholds of the regional plan. And also were determined to be consistent with and then furthers the goals and policies of the regional plan. Next slide, please. And so with that, staff is recommending approval of the required findings as described in attachment D, including a finding of no significant effect for adoption of the Tahoe Basin Area Plan amendments as described in your staff summary, and also is recommending adoption of the ordinance prepared, amending ordinance 2021-02 to amend the Tahoe Basin Area Plan as shown in attachment C of the staff summary. So with that, that concludes our presentation and we're happy to answer any questions.
Great. Thank you so much, Jacob, Crystal, Stacy. Thorough, clear, really, really clear for me. So we appreciate that. First, I'm going to go to APC members in the room here, questions, comments, and then we'll go online. So who would like to start? Anyone have anything? Maybe we can start with Kevin. This is a Placer County thing. Do you want to jump in?
We need these amendments, and honestly, I don't think they go as far as I'd like to see them go, but they're a step in the right direction. And I think Crystal and Stacy did a good job clarifying that there is no increase. This is not proposing an increase in density. This is not proposing changing the total number of housing units in the area. It is shifting the priorities and trying to streamline the development process for the types of development that we need to see. Is it enough? We'll find out. But is it a step in the right direction? Yes. So I'll leave it at that. I'm happy to respond to any like other questions or comments kind of from a local's perspective.
Yeah, short and sweet, but I think that's, you know, for me, you're a small business owner, you're a resident, right, in this area. So thank you for your perspective. Appreciate it. Ellery.
Thank you for the presentation. I think I just wanted to applaud Placer County for taking this step forward. I'm looking forward to going to Tahoe City and Kings Beach. It's a more vibrant area, more walkable, and so I look forward to that future. I think I had two comments. One is related to kind of the frequency with which you evaluate the effect of these changes. If they're not producing the desired outcome fast enough to your expectations, or maybe they're going too far, what's kind of your process for evaluating and then coming back and updating your plan?
Sure. I don't know that we have a formal structure in place, but we do. Our agency really focuses on adaptive management of all of our programs, right? So we're tracking projects annually. And I know, TRPA has the recertification process, which I think is it 4 years or 5 years, two years? So we're, as they're going through that, we're working on, taking a good look at what's happening in Placer County and recognizing, areas of needed change. This came about, what has been 2017, has been a while, right? It's been 6 years or so, but we did start in 2021. So it was really just a few years. And we've already made one set of, amended changes. So that was in, I think, 2021, February, related to housing. So I guess the answer is, I don't know that we have like a specific timeline for, coming forward with changes. It's more of just tracking the effectiveness, right, of what's happening in our town centers, and then sort of prioritizing when we need to come forward with, more amendments.
Thanks, Ellery.
Is it okay to proceed with a second comment?
Wow, why not?
Okay, all right,
Sure.
thank you. So I work at the Nevada Division of State Lands, and the state owns upwards of 500 parcels within the wildland urban interface. And obviously on the Nevada side, so this doesn't pertain to your jurisdiction, but I wanted to know if you had received any feedback from the California Tahoe Conservancy, who also owns urban lots, specifically to setbacks and the changes to the setback requirements. Our experience is sometimes when there are variances issued, they're on lots adjacent to the state-owned lots, that can have some negative impacts to, these sensitive forested parcels. So just wanted to know if you had received any comment back from the CTC.
I don't think we did get any comment from CTC. So yeah, I have not heard anything.
Thanks, Hillary. Pitch.
Christy, Crystal, Stacy, thanks for that great presentation. I just want to say that these seems like common sense amendments to your area plan and to kind of push that needle forward. And it tracks well, at least with our amendment process, because a lot of the ideas you're proposing, we're also going to be proposing in our area plan amendments we're going to bring forward in the next few months, particularly parking, employee housing, and multifamily development. Thanks.
Thanks, John. Jason.
Thanks for the presentation. Just one question on one item, the prohibition of property management and real estate offices on those frontage parcels. What kind of feedback did you get on that?
Well, actually, it was raised to us by the public. And it really was a result of, there was a new structure that was built in Tahoe City. And I think a lot of folks were trying to, occupy the building, and they contacted the landowner, and it turned out they rented it to a real estate office. And so it really caused some anger,
Yeah.
And so they started coming to, our public meetings that we had and said, what can we do about this? Is this an opportunity with these amendments to consider what land uses are allowed on the ground floor? And so we looked at it, and we came up with that language that basically no new property managers or real estate offices on the ground floor, but recognizing their need in the town center. So second floor on the sides and the rear, just not dominating that frontage.
Did you think about any variance to that in a situation where you have property and they can't fill the space, and they have somebody who wants to fill that space that is a real estate or property management? Is there any potential for a variance on that? Is that something that was talked about? I'm just wondering, if you get into a situation, you don't want to force the hand of a property owner to have space that's just vacant because the only potential tenant they have is something that's prohibited.
Right. I can say that it only applies to new property managers or real estate offices. So those that are occupying today, we would have a legal non-conforming clause that if they were, if that use was there before, we could possibly consider them to reoccupy that site as a similar use.
Yeah, and I'll just add, you can't do variances to use, right? So
Yeah.
you can do variances to development standards. So no, we haven't considered that. I think, this is something that was super important to our constituency base. And so we haven't considered that.
Okay.
No.
It's something I think other local jurisdictions might want to think about. If there's ways to, whether you increase costs, you disincentivize real estate or property management to be in those places rather than prohibiting them, because you don't want to get in a situation where you're telling a property owner what they can and can't do for leases in a situation where they may or may not be able to lease space. So it's just something to think about moving forward. Maybe we can track this one, see how it works, see if that situation comes up. But John, as you're working on those amendments for the city, I mean, there's a lot more frontage in the city of South Lake Tahoe than there probably is in the rest of the lake combined. So it might be something where you find ways to incentivize things other than property management and real estate, but you don't prohibit it.
I can respond. Originally, we did prohibit real estate offices within the town center along the street frontages. And we are proposing amendments where we're going to allow a certain amount.
Thanks, Jason. Other comments in the room? Jennifer.
Thank you. I particularly appreciated the part of the presentation on what you said the amendments are not doing. So thank you for including all those. Definitely help provide some clarity. I have a couple of things. One, and one of the comments I read yesterday talked about the allowance or the requirement for zero parking for some development. I couldn't tell if that was residential, where you're building or allowing new residential uses, but assuming people aren't going to have a car, or if it was more of that sort of shared bank restaurant thing that you were talking about.
Yeah, so there's a couple changes to parking. I'm gonna take it and then you can chime in if I miss it there, but a couple of things on the parking. One is to bring the parking requirements for residential units more consistent with where the state is going with parking. So we didn't eliminate, we reduced the number of stalls for both multifamily and I think single family, but it's not reduced, it's not eliminated, it's just reduced. What you may be hearing in the comments, there's some comments about what we're doing in town centers. So our board adopted a pilot program a couple of years ago that applies only to town centers that allows for projects when they come forward to propose a waiver of parking based on, it's a case-by-case basis where they would come in with a request that is reviewed by staff and a plan for parking. And it's mostly for mixed use projects. So where they could come in, let's just say they're putting in a, hotel, and then there's also some residential and some commercial. We could look at that, that project and potentially allow a waiver for the units that would have been allowed for the the retail piece, understanding that we need to make sure the project is parked right for the lodge, because you need to have stalls, parking stalls to for that hotel use. But the waiver is only allowed if that use then is contributing on an annual basis to transit. That's one of the things that we want to try to promote transit, right? So if you're reducing the parking in your town centers for those retail uses, you want those folks to be using transit, micro shuttles, and so we're collecting fees for that. So this was a pilot program that was adopted. The other thing that they are required to do is they have to participate in the county's parking management program that we're currently developing. So the idea is we want to bring those sites into this parking management program, have a comprehensive management program that has, public-private use, right? Where private folks are throwing their stalls into this parking management program in the town centers so that we get better use of our stalls. So there's some stipulations around when you can have a waiver, when we'll eliminate it. It's on case-by-case basis. We review it. They have to commit to transit. They have to commit to participating in the parking management program. That was a pilot program that has now been memorialized in these amendments. So we have a lot of projects in the hopper that want to take advantage of that, those provisions in that parking pilot program. And so we felt it was important to memorialize it here. So that's really the two areas of change.
Thank you. I appreciate that explanation. I was initially had some concern that there was a general assumption that people could live in these communities and not have a car. And I don't know that that's quite realistic yet, because you need affordable groceries and you need, you need a car to get to Reno, to go to Costco or whatever, if you want to, do that sort of thing. And so it's good to hear that you're not just assuming that people are going to stop driving and just use public transportation or live and work and somehow exist without a car. The other thing that I just wanted to note, and I've mentioned this in more than one forum at this point, is that you talk about your parking strategies and paid parking. I want us to be sensitive to the sort of creation of Tahoe as an exclusive destination, or the over gentrification of areas. We saw earlier today that the housing costs, the age of folks here, the income level of folks here is higher, and yet I know that coming out of Carson City, there are a lot of folks that work for me that are barely making ends meet, but they may want to go to a sandwich shop, grab some dinner, and take it to Tahoe, to bring their family up for a little while. If paid parking becomes a limitation to their ability to access those sorts of activities, that's a real concern for me. Someone coming up from the Bay Area that's used to paying $40, $50, $60, $70 a day for parking comes up here and they're like, oh, $20, $30 a day, that's a bargain. But someone from a local area would have a very different view of that. So I want to try to protect against, like I said, the over gentrification of the basin, and maybe look at ways where you could get local discounts for parking or something like that, that continues to make the basin accessible for everyone.
Thank you for that. I do want to mention, so the paid parking program is separate and apart from this, what we're bringing forward today. It is something being worked on out of our Department of Public Works office in Tahoe. So it's currently in process and going through the public process. But with it, it's coupled with programs like our micro shuttle, where we're trying to get people to shuttle to go get their groceries, or shuttle to go get a cup of coffee, right? Instead of hopping in their car. So it's not just the paid parking. It's a multi-pronged strategy really to really reduce VMT is the intent.
Yeah, I think just finding that balance is going to be challenging with all the communities in the basin, and I'm glad you're working on it.
Thanks, Jennifer. Anyone else in the room? Okay, seeing none, let me go to my colleagues online, and I see Mr. Young's hand up. Go ahead, Eric.
Hello, everybody. Thank you again. I've really appreciated all these comments. Hillary and Jennifer's comments were right on. Thank you for those to both of you. The presentation was really spectacular, just like some of the others have indicated here. Washoe County is working on some amendments to our area plan. We're not sure what they're going to be. We're thinking through them, many of the same challenges. And this idea that the basin is kind of a laboratory of ideas is really good for us. We really appreciate hear what Placer County is doing. We hope to learn from that, both immediately and in the long term, just as we do from all of you. But we'll be coming forward with something. And so we really appreciate seeing how this presentation and these ideas were received, and we'll be looking forward to seeing how they're implemented. Hillary, your comments about tracking and understanding how you meet your goals and how to make adjustments and really how to move forward on this adaptive management concept is really something that Washoe County is very interested in. We're trying to do much better in that and to develop ways of tracking and monitoring our goals. And so we appreciate those comments. So thank you for this. I think we'll be quite interested in seeing how things play out, and we'll be using this experience to help us develop some of our own approaches to the same issues. So thank you.
Thank you, Eric. I don't see any other hands raised online. So yeah, I'll just say ditto to what some of my colleagues have said, and kudos to Placer County. I think this is good planning. I think you're doing your jobs, right? You're trying to evaluate why aren't we getting the progress that we want to see in our town centers. And I think these are great amendments. I think as we move forward in our area planning process, we're going to consider these too, just like the city and Washoe have said. So thank you for that. Just one quick basic question for me. When you talked a lot about deed restricted housing and exceptions you're making there, was that deed restricted for workforce, or was it for cost, or was it either?
It's not cost. It's achievable. I said workforce. I'm sorry. It's achievable housing per the TRPA definition.
Okay.
That's my understanding, right? Exactly.
Okay. Yeah, I know those terms. It's hard, I think, for all of us to keep those straight. So thanks for that clarification. Okay, I'm going to move us on to public comment. We good there? Okay, and I do just want to thank the public for written comments and testimony. We have, I'm looking at it, there's significant public comment. One of these documents is 456 pages long. So thank you for the written public comment. And let's go to oral comment now. And we'll start in the room, and then we will go online. So let's start in the room. Ms. Waller, welcome again.
Thank you, Ellie Waller. I participated in so many planning processes, starting in 2007 with the regional plan update at that time, which was pathways. Then I was a member of the North Tahoe West area plan team for several years. 3 minutes isn't going to cover what all of you have heard, 450 pages plus today, plus endless other meetings we've submitted to. I don't think the public, the residential public that lives there, some of the locals that have lived there for a long time are being equally represented in what you're hearing. The process, I believe, had a breakdown the first 2 years. There wasn't the public I'm speaking of now, me and many others that you've heard from. You have had comments submitted to you from the Sierra Club, Tahoe Clean Air, Mountain Area Preservation League, all with concerns that have not adequately been addressed, in my opinion. I don't think they've been sat down with significantly enough. Again, 3 minutes isn't going to give you a perspective from me or anybody else that comments today. There's a lawsuit. Thank you.
Thank you, Ellie. Other comments in the room? Okay, seeing none. Catherine, let me just quickly read my online statement just as a reminder. So to participate in the meeting, in the calendar on trpa.gov, click on Advisory Planning Commission, December 6th. There you'll find a link to the webinar hosted on Zoom. If any member of the public wishes to address APC now, please raise your hand by clicking on the raise hand button at the bottom of your Zoom screen, or by dialing *9 on your telephone. You'll be called upon and unmuted by a TRPA staff member. And let me turn this over to you, Catherine. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So far, 3 hands are up. Top of the list is Rhonda Tyser. Rhonda, if you unmute, you can address the commission.
Thank you. Cascadia's primary suggestion for making affordable housing in Tahoe is to eliminate minimums for parking lots and garages for living units. In fact, eliminating parking garages was more critical to making development affordable than increasing height, coverage, or density. Cascadia presented several visuals that showed how many more living units could be included on a parcel if the old mandate for at least 1 parking space was eliminated. Cascadia relied on research showing how other towns had managed to eliminate parking garages and increase units, thus decreasing developers per unit cost. But eliminating parking for a low-income Tahoe resident worker is a non-starter. I can't think of anyone in Incline who doesn't need a car except maybe temporary J1s using microtransit for summer months. Cascadia published a memorandum, Parking Management for Housing Affordability and Complete Communities. They estimate people would pay rent on a tiny unit of less than 700 square feet at $2,400 a month. I was struck by the idea that residents paying nearly $30,000 a year for a 700 square foot unit would need to be making about $85,000, assuming housing eats up a third of their salary. And I tried to imagine who would live in the units without a car if they made $90,000 a year. They might be a high-tech person working on a computer, but they would probably not qualify for affordable housing. So Cascadia refers to many other towns that have eliminated minimal parking on site, but the references are almost 99% for urban settings, not rural. And those areas don't have Tahoe's topography or weather. So with red flag days in winter, there are no places on streets for parking once the snow falls, nor can workers get around by walking in snow. So the idea of eliminating parking for affordable housing units in town centers in Tahoe is wishful thinking. Resident workers need their cars. They have to park somewhere. Developers need to build 1 covered parking space per unit on a lower floor of any affordable development in Tahoe, even if it means getting public money for development. Jennifer Carr is right. Paid parking is a limitation to access for locals. It will create a lack of accessibility, and shuttles don't work for shopping, especially in winter. Get real. We need at least one parking space per unit in Tahoe. Thank you.
Thank you, Rhonda.
The next hand up is Suzanne Pecci. Suzanne, if you unmute, you can address the commission.
Thank you. For the record, my name is Suzanne Pecci, and I'm a resident of the city of Elk Grove and a second home owner of an Old Lake Tahoe home in Tahoe Vista on North Lake Boulevard for over 50 years. I'm an active member of my local community of Elk Grove, where I have resided for over 40 years. We moved to Elk Grove, a rural community of 10,000 from the Bay Area in 1978. Since the incorporation of our area in the last 23 years, planning and development has increased density to almost 200,000 people. Traffic is creating traffic congestion. Time across town used to take 10 minutes. Now it takes 20 to 30 minutes. We left this urbanization in the Bay Area, but we're experiencing it now. In listening to this presentation by Placer County staff, it sounds and looks like the same presentation that I've listened to from the same playbook over the last 23 years since we've incorporated. The same buzzwords: destination city, outdoor by right wine and beer venues, worker housing by right on farmland, sidewalk venues, industrial uses in sensitive environmental areas, unlimited food trucks, packing in high-density housing into environmentally sensitive areas without appropriate environmental review of impacts to water quality and air quality, vibrant communities, walkabout communities, transit centers. Nothing about any of this presentation is new, except that this is for Lake Tahoe and not Elk Grove. As a longtime property owner at Lake Tahoe, I remember the time when when TRPA was formed with a very lofty mission of saving Lake Tahoe for future generations. This is all very disappointing because nothing on this presentation is new or tailored to a very special, unique natural resource. Nothing in this presentation supports the very reason that TRPA was formed. When will there ever be enough development in Lake Tahoe? Sounds like from this presentation, TRPA is already contemplating changes to the very amendment they're looking for approval for today. Thank you.
Thank you, Suzanne.
Next hand raised is Gavin from the League to Save Lake Tahoe. Gavin, if you unmute, you can address the commission.
Thank you. Yes, good afternoon, Chair and Commissioners. Are we afternoon? Yeah, just barely. And staff, both county and TRPA staff. Gavin Feiger, Policy Director on behalf of the League to Save Lake Tahoe. We did submit a bit of a detailed comment letter. You might have found it in your inbox or what was forwarded on to you. I'll summarize briefly here what we said. Basically, we're just not seeing the need or justification or additional environmental benefits from these amendments. We asked repeatedly to the county for some specific information on progress since the TBAP was first adopted in 2017, how implementation is going, effectiveness of mitigation measures, what's working, what's not. We haven't seen that information at all. And economic development isn't part of our mission. Our mission is to protect and improve the environment. With that said, we do very much support the proposed parking changes and some of the focus on providing affordable housing, similar to what the city's proposing in their area plan amendments, and would like to have seen it limited, the amendments limited just really to that. I don't want to spend much time talking about parking, but I'm more than happy to get into detail with anyone about the importance of parking management, including paid parking and reduced parking requirements. This is for as all area plans and plan amendments come along here in the next year or two. I lived car-free in Tahoe for 6 years. I currently drive very infrequently. I have a lot of stories and real life experiences I can share from others who are not car dependent by choice or not by choice. There is demand out there for car-free living. So for you commissioners today, spend the rest of my time focusing on area plan conformity. Community character is a big one. We put some detail in our comment letter on this. The role of TRPA by allowing area plans is that local jurisdictions still have to align with TRPA's regional plan, that whole series of documents. That includes community character with the conformity checklist. I can't speak for the North Shore in detail because I live on the South Shore, but hearing a lot of pushback from the community about conforming with their vision for their community character. And then thresholds is the big one. I could talk for minutes and probably an hour about the vehicle miles traveled threshold, but there is a new, as of 2021, vehicle miles traveled threshold, and achieving that threshold is paramount to all of our transportation efforts. TRPA needs to be the backstop and do and require the due diligence to achieve and maintain them. The TBAP amendments as proposed were not analyzed under the current VMT threshold, and that is probably the biggest shortcoming in our opinion. So thanks for the time.
Thank you, Gavin.
The next hand raised is Christina Hill. Christina, if you unmute, you can address the commission.
Hello, my name is Christina Hill. I am a former TRPA employee. I was the shore zone planner at TRPA for 4 years. I am since then been a planning consultant in Tahoe for 43 years or some crazy amount of time. I am against these amendments. They do not, the adequate environmental analysis of what these amendments will result in has not been done. An initial environmental checklist, are you kidding me? This is just check no, no, no. Oh, we've come to the conclusion there's no impact. There needs to be a comprehensive environmental analysis done, such as an EIR, EIS, to evaluate these far-reaching, growth-inducing impacts or proposals to change the character of our communities. And I think, an EIR, EIS would have alternatives to the preferred alternative. It would have cumulative impacts analyzed. It would be a much easier pill to swallow if this environmental documentation had been done correctly. With just an environmental checklist, I can't buy off on there is going to be no significant environmental impact based on these amendments. And I think, having that presentation by Ken Kasman prior to the presentation of the amendments was kind of interesting to see that, the population's decreased. There's no, the basis for his analysis was the 2020 census data, which is so outdated. It's hard to believe that anybody can swallow that. I live in Incline. I've seen huge amounts of increase in traffic, in population, in garbage, in parking stages. And it's been very disheartening to see that this whole basis for these changes are based on inadequate information, such as the 2020 data. Since then there's been the COVID migration, and we have been at the end of our rope trying to deal with all these tremendous changes in our community. Thank you.
Thank you, Christina.
The last hand raised is Pamela Sigdinos. Pamela, if you unmute, you can address the commission.
Yes, I'd like to let you know that I'm a full-time resident also of Incline Village, and we have seen tremendous impacts over the last several years in particular. I'm asking you to vote no on any motion to recommend adoption. I'm also asking you to reject staff findings. I believe that there has not been sufficient analysis on the environmental as well as the infrastructure the infrastructure's overall limitations. I would really encourage you to take a listen to this presentation on Rewind when you have a chance to listen to the audio. I believe I heard the word food trucks mentioned more often than I did any concern. And the food truck comments were about how to make it easier for food trucks, how to make it more accessible for food trucks. I wish there had been similar amounts of time given to accessibility for residents to leave the basin in the event of an emergency, accessibility of residents to move around the basin, to just get to doctor appointments, to be able to move to any kind of needs to get shopping, but not competing with food trucks and visitors. The growth-inducing component of this particular set of amendments really boggles the mind. I also really would encourage you all to watch the 60 Minutes episode that aired on November 16th. There was an extensive analysis of the lack of sufficient planning of infrastructure for Lahaina, and there was absolutely tragic discussion about the lack of available infrastructure for residents and visitors on roads. There were fire hydrants that ran out of water. These are real life concerns. This is not an academic exercise. Relying on consultants who don't live here, who don't understand the topography, the climate, the extreme weather risks, frankly, is a bit of an insult to those of us who live here. It is really critical. You are our public servants. You are the individuals who we rely on to make good policy. And I would encourage you to table and go back to the drawing board and take into consideration all of the valid concerns that have been raised both by the public and some of the commission members. You don't have a chance to do this twice. Once these buildings are in place and the roads are jammed, our lives are at risk. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your comment.
One more hand went up, Mr. Chair. Sophia Heydrich, if you unmute, you can address the commission.
Good afternoon, Advisory Planning Commissioners. My name is Sophia Heydrich, and I am the Advocacy Director for Mountain Area Preservation. Thank you for the opportunity to provide comments on the proposed Placer County Tahoe Basin Area Plan today. There is a wide variety of proposals in this package of amendments. Everything from code cleanups to roadway and frontage standards to prohibiting new single-family uses in town centers. And I actually don't think there's a lot of concern or controversy related to many of these proposals, but there are concerns related to the changes in setback requirements, allowing deed-restricted multifamily housing projects by right and associated impacts, and particularly related to the incomplete environmental analysis. We've heard from Placer County staff that the county just isn't seeing the redevelopment that was envisioned in the 2017 TBAP or the 2021 amendments. I think that that's a tough argument to make, given that it's only been 6 years since the TBAP was adopted and 2 years since the amendments were adopted, and we went through a global pandemic, which slowed down everything. There are a number of projects that have already submitted applications or are in the hopper, and so we don't understand, what projects need these amendments to be viable. We pointed that out in some of Placer County's meetings last year, but that's still an outstanding question. In terms of environmental analysis, we feel that the review of the cumulative impacts is still lacking. The EIR addendum and erratum did not consider the cumulative impacts of increased VMT, particularly related to the projected growth in the town of Truckee recently adopted general plan. There was some discussion of the Village of Palisades specific plan, but it essentially says that because a different project has been taken off the books, that somehow offsets the impact from the Palisades development. We feel that that is an insufficient analysis. And there are a number of other projects proposed in the reasonably foreseeable future, and their cumulative impacts must be considered as well. I also wanted to briefly comment on the building heights discussion, and I think that the reason that there is so much confusion and concern on that particular issue is because of the TRPA's parallel housing amendments planning process. Following Placer County's workshop in March, the proposed increase in building heights was taken out of the proposal, as you've heard, and we super appreciated and supported that. Since then, we learned about the TRPA's proposed housing amendments, which would put those heights right back on the table. And I just don't think that that feels transparent to the community. It's created a lot of confusion, a lot of concern. And then finally, I wanted to bring up wildfire. And I just hope that a key takeaway from these various planning processes is that wildfire is a very real threat in the Tahoe Basin, and the community is asking for more analysis. We want to know how the potential development that is allowed under the TRPA's regional plan will impact evacuation and what can be done to better prepare and plan for wildfire. I think we keep bringing this up. We keep hoping that this analysis will be part of these planning processes and evaluated under CEQA, but we keep hearing that because overall density will not increase, that's not an impact that the jurisdictions need to consider at this point. Please hear the community on this one, evaluate wildfire. If it's not in this process, then through an alternative planning process. And I think that that's my time. So thank you so much for hearing my comments today.
Thank you, Sophia.
One more hand up. Niobe, I believe Burden is the last name. If you unmute, you can address the commission.
Yes, hi, this is Niobe Burden, and I am just a resident of Tahoe Vista, and having come back to the Tahoe area after 10 years away, I just found that it was an extreme difference in what I knew prior to when I was living here in the early 2000s. To say that there's no increase in tourism and population and so forth is just absolutely crazy in my opinion, especially with Truckee and Reno and Carson also involved. I want to reiterate Gavin of the League's public comment, and I think it's great that they're they are supporting some changes that haven't been done. And we've come a long way, but it's not where it needs to be. Parking management needs to be in place before zero parking in town centers and 0.75 per unit in multi-family zones is put into place. I sent in a comment showing pictures in Incline Village, as you might have seen, of the parking on the roads everywhere in those Incline apartments. Who's to say that doesn't happen with the next, and as we go forward without parking management in place. The achievable definition is a loophole, which has already been brought up many times. It's being advertised in 3 projects, which I included in another public comment, Alpine View Estates, Alpine Estates, and another one. And it's a loophole that is going to allow a lot of development and that's not intended for the real need. We need affordable and moderate housing units, and this achievable is going to take that away, that possibility away, because of course the developers are going to go for the achievable. Why would they go for affordable and moderate? It's not an incentive at all. Thank you, Sophia of MAP, for clarifying the height issue. Yes, the parallel TRPA amendments are just going to put it right back in. So that's a huge concern. And lastly, the environmental analysis. Why is an ERR required for an area plan and rezoning for RENA housing requirements, but not for these amendments? I think this is why there's a lawsuit. Thank you very much. And please consider taking this back for more detailed analysis in the details. The devil's in the details.
Thank you, Niobe.
Mr. Chair, there are no other hands raised to comment on this item.
Okay, thank you, Catherine. I'll close public comment. Thank you for the public commenters. Some themes there, again, questioning the environmental analysis, which I know your staff talked about with the addendum and the errata to CEQA along with the IEC. More, lots of comments about growth inducing and expansion, but I think you addressed that head on by saying nothing is expanded beyond what was already approved and contemplated in the 27 TBAP. So correct me if I'm wrong on that. Continued concerns about wildfire evacuation. I think all of us are always concerned about that. We live here, our families live here. That's a peak concern to all of us. So I don't know if there's any more comment on that. And then the VMT, discussion, I don't know, John, if you want to say anything about the VMT threshold, because that continues to come up in the comments we're hearing, including the league's comments. So those are just what I heard. Does staff, TRPA, does anyone want to respond to any public comment to clarify anything or?
Sure. I think on the CEQA, I touched on that already. Our board took action on the CEQA document that, we prepared the addendum and the errata and felt that those were appropriate for this. I do want to point out, when we look at preparing CEQA documents and when EIRs and EISs come into play, it's typically when you have land use changes. And what I mean by that is you're rezoning land, you're changing colors on a map, you are increasing density, right? You're putting residential where maybe there was, I don't know, recreation or something. And so you really need to look at what does that density increase do? What are the impacts associated with that to the environment, right? So, but we are not doing that here. We have what we would call as a plan that came up through planners. There are no land use changes. We are not rezoning land here. We're not changing land use designations. We are making mostly changes really to development standards to try to achieve the goals of the former plan. So from a CEQA perspective, we are our board is very comfortable with the addendum that was prepared. I think we're comfortable with the IEC. It's appropriate in this case. These are very minor changes related to standards to try to meet the overall goal of the TBAP and of the regional plan. And that goal really, what was analyzed before, that build out and the carrying capacity has not changed. So that would be the comment on CEQA. And then growth inducing is the same. Again, we're not changing, we're not increasing, density. I know it sounds, for some folks, they may think that if we were trying to encourage redevelopment that we're changing it. The fact is, those projects in the town centers can come in today under the existing code and develop. They're not, right? And we're seeing people come in, but they're not moving forward real fast. So the opportunity for them to come in has not changed, right? They were allowed today and they would be allowed with these amendments. So from a growth inducing perspective, again, we're not changing the build out of the plan. So I think I answered that. On the VMT, again, it's the same thing. These amendments are not increasing density, not increasing population, not increasing, the VMT. That analysis have been done in the area plan. I don't know if TRPA wants to respond, to that as well or add on to that, but that would be, that's my perspective there. Same thing with wildfire and EVAC. The former 2017 EIR EIS that was prepared for the TBAP did analyze wildfire risk and evacuation based on, again, the population, right, that would have been associated with that build out. That build out is not changing. So the addendum then relies on that analysis because that population base associated with that density is not changing as a result of these amendments. So that's the response there.
I also sorry, John, one other thing I forgot to mention is Gavin did comment about requesting an implementation report from Placer County. And I just wanted to comment that is an attachment. It's attachment K. It's attached to this item on TRPA's page for today's meeting. I don't know if you have anything more there, but
yeah, I can definitely speak to that. And thank you I actually had that on my list here and I forgot to mention that. So we did receive those comments from the league, and actually the implementation report was prepared in response to those comments. And so we wanted to try to provide a written summary of what we have done to implement. When you're talking about implementation of mitigation measures, that occurs with development. So the EIR, EIS that was prepared as part of the Tahoe Basin Area Plan looked at the impacts of future development that could occur under that area plan, right? And then it identified mitigation measures that you would apply to those projects as they come forward. The fact is, we haven't seen the projects come forward. So those mitigation measures that are in that EIR, EIS haven't, there's been a few small stuff that has come forward here and there, and we apply those mitigation measures. But we haven't seen a lot. So the implementation of those mitigation measures happens when the development comes forward. But there's a whole lot of policies and programs that are in the area plan that we have been working on. And so we have tried to summarize that in that the implementation report. And that goes back to what I said in my opening remarks, that we have spent millions of dollars on improvements in our county. And so what we did in that implementation report is to try to illustrate where those dollars have gone. We have had improvements in transit and mobility, active transit, trails, and housing. And so we have tried to illustrate that in that report. In addition, we went through there's an implementation plan chapter that's part of our document, where it lists a whole bunch of different projects that the county and public utility, all sorts of folks are working on, mostly public agencies. And we have provided a status of every one of those. And a lot of them are water quality improvements or trail projects. And I think, 24 of them, I think, have been completed. So while the mitigation measures maybe have not been implemented as much as we would have liked to see, because we haven't seen that development, we have been actively working on implementation of the TBAP, actively working on implementation of TRPA's regional plan, and really meeting regional goals around housing and transportation. Those are two of the big areas of focus for us. So that's my response there.
Thank you. Yeah, Garth.
Garth Alling for the record. I'm trying to remember, excuse me, from last month when we were talking about area-wide stormwater plans that have been approved. I think there's one that's active in South Lake Tahoe, and was the other one that's active in Tahoe City? Is that correct?
I believe so. Yeah, there's a regional treatment system.
Regional treatment system that's active there. Okay, and then what's the status of such a plan in Kings Beach area?
Can you speak to that? I know we talk about the implementation report that I mentioned has a section on TMDL and talks about our work in that area. I'm not sure of that specific question, but we'll track that down here.
Okay, yeah, and the reason why it's the same comment that I made last month in regards to reducing parking. I think you're just kicking the can down the road. You're going to have people that are going to end up parking in non-paved areas, and you have potential for increased erosion associated with that. And I didn't see any of that covered in the IEC, so I think there's a small deficiency there. And I just wanted to point that out. The other question that I have is all of these public comments that we've been hearing and also received via email. Were all of these comments, or the majority of these comments, also given in response to the draft EIR that was prepared? And were those comments all responded to? Because I think there are some comments that people have made that they feel a little frustrated that there has been no response. Could you speak to that?
Yeah, so when you prepare an EIR and you prepare a draft that goes out for public comment, there's a formal legal requirement, right, for it to be on the street for public comment.
Yes.
So when that was prepared back in, it was actually prepared in 2016, released, and we are obligated to respond to those. So that final document that was adopted and certified was included those responses. In an addendum, it's a little bit different. We don't have that requirement of preparing formal responses in a final document. What I can say is we have sifted through, stacks and stacks of comments, along with a traffic study that was submitted at our board on October 16th, right before the board hearing. And that was one of the reasons the board said, we're going to press pause. We're going to come back on October 31st because we want staff to look at this. So that written response that has been submitted to you is what we did is we sifted through those. We identified themes and common areas and then provided that written response. Do we have to do that legally? No. But we did it because we felt it was important to include for our board's consideration and for the the commission here today and moving forward to the governing board.
Great, thank you. And I guess my next question, I think it's just important for clarification for the public. And John, maybe you can speak to this. When people make comments and send comments to us, right now, there's no requirement that a response is given to them for each comment that they make. Is that correct? Yes. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman. Steve, I think the attachment that Ms. Jacobson was referring to is attachment M in our packet. You referenced attachment K, which is the implementation plan. But attachment M came from the Board of Supervisors review and staff's review of all the comments that have been received on this. I thought attachment M was a very comprehensive, detailed analysis of responses, even though it wasn't legally required. I think it was prudent to do so. And I think it, as you've mentioned, Mr. Chairman, it's part of our record here. There's a whole section in there about wildfire and evacuation, which is spoken to by the people responsible for that within Placer County. And so, you know, if that's something that folks haven't read, I would encourage them to read it, because I think it really, and I've went to a lot of the meetings that were listed up here over the years, and I've lived in the area and worked in the area, and it is sad to see the state of Tahoe City and Kings Beach. These communities are much less lively than they used to be back in the 70s and the 80s. They're more walkable, and there's some environmental improvements in stormwater systems, including in Kings Beach with the Commercial Core Improvement Project, but they are a shadow of their former self. Yes, you can walk, but where do you walk to? Buildings that are boarded up, lots that are fenced off. You know, those are not environmentally appropriate communities. And I do believe, as Mr. Drake said, as being a resident of the area, that this is a step forward. And having talked with folks who are trying to build affordable housing, deed restricted housing, achievable housing, you know, they see this as a step forward for their efforts to build the housing that we need. It doesn't come easy. We're trying to break the addiction that a lot of developers have, is we just build things that are big and large that people pay a lot of money for. And we have to break that cycle. And I believe that this package that we have before us today is an attempt to break that cycle. And I appreciate the county's leadership on this. It's not been easy. It's tough to be vilified and excoriated for trying to do something, but I know this is something that's faced by the other jurisdictions, El Dorado County, the city, Washoe County. So I really have a strong feeling of wanting to see the communities of Tahoe City and Kings Beach come back to the vibrancy that they used to have, and have it be in a way that's currently environmentally appropriate. And that's not what's happening there now. So thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Steve. Garth? Steve, thank you for bringing up attachment M. I just, and reiterating that all that information is there, because I think it's important for the public to know that comments are being responded to and are being listened to. And thank you, Crystal, for just reiterating all of that what has happened during the CEQA process. I think that's extremely important. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Garth. Kevin, you want to jump in?
Yeah. I feel compelled to put some of the minimum parking language in context. I hear you loud and clear, Jennifer, in your comments about it seems impractical, right, to build without at least a car per person. I've heard that many times in the community. People are fearful of this. The reality is there is demand for car-free, as Gavin said, car-free living. It's small. It's a tiny minority, but guess what? That minority is the population that needs housing as well. And giving our developers the opportunity to decouple parking from a living space, give people the option. It doesn't mean building, a 50-unit place with zero parking. It might mean 25 spaces, and you pay an extra $400 a month if you want a parking space. And if you don't, you get much more affordable rent. And I can speak from experience because when I was in graduate school, I got a very cheap apartment that didn't have any parking. I mean, it was very inexpensive and was very convenient, and I was willing to give up the convenience of having dedicated parking for a very affordable place to live. So that was a long time ago, but there's still people who work for me today who don't own cars and are not J1s and they walk to work. It's a small percentage, but they exist, you know, and people, if you live in Central Incline, you can probably walk to Rayleigh's or the new grocery outlet, or soon the new Natural Grocers. If you live in Kings Beach, it's pretty easy to walk to Safeway when the paths are plowed. But there is a small segment of our population that would benefit from this, and those are the people at the low end of the income spectrum. If we take the say maybe 5%, I think I've heard that number referred to, maybe less than 5% of people who don't own cars, they are almost certainly going to be in that lower income. Most are going to be in that lower income bracket. And anyway, and if that can help to move these projects forward, I think it's important. The other thing is Kings Beach has quite a bit of underutilized parking, and as I think most of our communities do. For broad numbers, this is anecdotal, but last I checked, Kings Beach had twice the number of parking spaces as Truckee and half the amount of commercial floor area. Ballpark. But we're talking about the need to better utilize the parking we have and figure out how to do that, between business, between a bank and a brewery, things like that. The other thing I want to comment on is everyone is, after the Caldor fire in particular, everyone is on edge about wildfire evacuation, and it's an ongoing concern. And, we do a lot of modeling and there's plans in place, and I know our agencies are doing their best to figure out what the best options are. I think the reality is the proposed changes that are coming before us today are about creating vibrant town centers and affordable housing. That is stopping that progress will definitely keep our towns from becoming the vibrant towns that everybody deserves for people who live here. We need to be addressing the day use visitors. We need to be addressing the number of people who can freely drive into the basin anytime and pack the basin full of as many cars as we can literally fit. We need to be talking about a basin entry fee or some type of system like that for the people who are out in the public who are very concerned and vocal about wildfire evacuation. I want to just steer the focus back to the bigger conversation about how we manage day use visitors and interregional transportation. Because if we let our fears about evacuation stop progress in our town centers, or we're going to lose our schools. We're going to lose the ability for this to be a year-round community. And that's my fear, is we're throwing the baby out with the bathwater by lawsuit after lawsuit stopping progress to make our small town centers more vibrant. I feel like they're related, but they're separate issues with separate solutions. So.
Good comments, Kevin. Thanks. Garth, I do know, I believe that Kings Beach is a registered catchment for Placer County, and so they're meeting their TMDL credit. I'm looking on LT info and can't quite tease out if Kings Beach is registered, but I think it is. And that means that Placer County as a whole is meeting the TMDL load reduction requirements for Kings Beach towards the water quality goals. So I do know that. Okay, we have two motions to make. Do we have any final thoughts, or can we go on to motions? Okay, let's move on to motions. There they are on the screen. Would any APC member care to make motion one?
I'll make the motion, Mr. Chair. Make a motion number one and make a motion to recommend approval of the required findings as described in attachment D, including a finding of no significant effect for adoption of the area plan amendment as described in the staff summary.
Thank you,
Kevin.
Kevin.
Making them separately.
Yeah, let's do them separate.
Eric Young, second.
Thank you, Mr. Young. Any questions on the motion? Okay, Tracy, roll call vote, please.
Ms. Chandler,
Yes.
Mr. Oling,
Yes.
Ms. Carr,
Yes.
Mr. Drew,
Yes.
Mr. Hitchcock,
Yes.
Mr. Drake,
Yes.
Mr. Hill,
Yes.
Miss Simon,
Yes.
Mr. Young,
Yes.
Mr. Teixeira,
Yes.
Miss Stala,
Yes.
Mr. Ferry.
Yes,
Mr. Chair, the motion passes.
thank you, Tracy. Motion number 2. Anyone care? Kevin?
I'll
Thank
make
you.
that motion as well. Motion number 2 is a motion to recommend adoption of ordinance 2024 to be determined. Amending ordinance 2021 02 to amend the Tahoe Basin Area Plan as shown in attachment C.
Eric Young, second.
Thank you, Kevin. Mr. Hitchcock beat you on that one, Mr. Young, so we'll go
Oh,
with Hitch.
okay.
Thank you. And back to you, Tracy. Thank you.
Mr. Hitchcock,
Yes.
Mr. Drew,
Yes.
Miss Chandler,
Yes.
Mr. Drake,
Yes.
Mr. Orling,
Yes.
Mr. Hill,
Yes.
Miss Carr,
Yes.
Miss Simon,
Yes.
Mr. Teixeira,
Yes.
Miss Stala,
Yes.
Mr. Young,
Yes.
Mr. Ferry.
Yes.
The motion also passes.
Thank you, Tracy. All right. Thank you all. Placer County, good luck in your future hearings.
Thank you very
RPIC,
much.
RPIC
Thanks.
and governing board. All right, that concludes that item. Thank you all. Thank you to the public for engaging. We'll continue onward. And I'm going to move us to item 7, which are reports. I'm going to pass this to Mr. Hester for the executive director report, including upcoming topics.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First of all, your actions last time you met on the Phase 2 housing amendments were forwarded to the, what is now called the Regional Planning Committee, used to be called RPIC. The board realigned their committees a little bit, and they moved it on to the board, and the board will be hearing that next week. So that's the report on what actions you took. The motion from the Regional Planning Committee had a few clarifications, a few explanatory text added to the code, but nothing significantly different than what you all passed. Upcoming, as you know, the APC is the lead entity, is delegated the lead entity responsibility for the Threshold Update Initiative Stakeholder Working Group, affectionately known as TUISWIG, and your vice chair is the chair of that working group, and that group will be meeting December 19th. And the other working group that we have is the Tahoe Living Working Group, and your chair is the chair of that committee, and it is meeting, I believe, January 31st of next year. So those items will be coming up. As Mr. Hitchcock mentioned, there's some area plan amendments coming from the city of South Lake Tahoe. We anticipate some other area plan amendments as well as some climate amendments coming forward, but I don't know the specific dates. I did want to tell you that the report that goes to the governing board on how the local governments are doing on delegated area planning, this stuff Commissioner Stoller asked about. We put that report, send that report to the board. It's in their packet next week. It's actually on the consent agenda. And it recommends all of the area plans continue to be certified. And if anybody wants to get that report, I can send you the link, or you can just look on our governing board packet. And then finally, and probably as important as anything else, Ms. Stoller, I just mentioned the report on the area plans is available on our website. Yeah, it's on the governing board agenda, so you can just look at it there. The 2-year terms of your chair and vice chair have come to an end as of today. And so one of the two has asked that she, so I'm not gonna say who, but she has a new position and is very busy and has asked to step back from being an officer. But the other member is willing to serve in either position, but we thought we would, Brendan and I talked about this, we should open it up to anybody who wants to be considered. You can call me and talk to me about it, or email me or whatever. You can call Brendan and ask him what it really takes to be chair. And we, from the staff perspective, really appreciate, I know Steve served a couple terms as chair too. We really appreciate what you do as chair and work very closely to plan the agenda and plan the presentations and try to make these meetings as meaningful and go as smoothly as possible. So hope some others would step up. Not that we don't want Brendan to continue if others don't want the positions, but just wanted to invite you to contact me or contact Brendan and we'll get in touch and try to have a slate of officers for your next meeting.
Right, so yeah, just to clarify, we'll be voting on chair and vice chair at the January meeting. And so
Unless we don't get a slate of officers.
right. But I just encourage, my colleagues, if anyone wants to step into this role, I encourage you to do so. And don't, like John said, don't hesitate to call me. I'm happy to talk about it.
Or if you don't want to volunteer, you could nominate a friend.
With their permission.
I will come looking for someone if we don't have a slate of officers, and Brendan knows I did that about 4 years ago.
John, I just, something that I've spoken briefly about in the past, and I'd really like to see maybe next springtime. I mean, hopefully there's going to be some snow on the ground here soon. I think it would be very important for the APC to do a field visit to the NV Energy project that was implemented over here underneath the power lines, the forest thinning that happened. I attended the Tahoe Douglas Fire Protection District board meeting, I think it was just last week, and NV Energy gave a presentation on the project that they've been doing. And I mean, with all the talk of wildfire and evacuation concern and everything else, I think it's very timely and extremely important that everybody on the APC understands the project and how it can really be implemented to a whole variety of areas in our basin. And so I have some contacts, if you'd like, I can share those with you. And I think it would be a great field visit and maybe even having NV Energy come here and give us a presentation.
Yeah, I will. We had the walking tour on the North Shore because Commissioner Drake, sorry, brought that up and he helped on the tour and it made it much more valuable. I think I wasn't able to attend, but I think your comments as a small business owner and someone who experiences the impacts of the actions we take really made it more valuable is everything I heard. So I would like to enlist your help in contacting people, but maybe even being part of the tour.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I'd be more than happy to help and sort of step in and have some discussions out there in the field on how these fuel breaks not only, protect our community, but protect the forest at large from significant loss.
We'll reach out to you and try to set that up sometime.
Yeah, I think springtime.
Okay.
Jennifer Carr, for the record, just to follow up on that as another idea. I went on the legislative tour around the time of the summit, and one of the stops we made was the Meeks Bay area to learn about the fire management, forest management from the Washoe tribe. And I had some awareness of those topics, but until I was out there hearing from the tribe, seeing it on the ground, it made a different impact. So it might be another opportunity to bundle those ideas together.
And since you will not be vice chair by then, I know you'll have time to help us on that one too, correct? Thank you.
All right, thanks, John. Thanks, everyone. And on to the next, John. Anything on the general council status report? Your microphone. I got
Excuse
to
me.
finally correct you for a while.
Yeah. As you've heard referenced a couple times today, there's been a lawsuit filed by some kind of North Shore citizens groups, Friends of North Shore or West Shore, TahoeCleanAir.org, and North Tahoe Preservation Alliance has sued the County of Placer over the county's adoption of the area plan that you just recommended. That's been filed in state court. It's a CEQA lawsuit based under CEQA, and really and correct me if I'm wrong, Crystal, but basically the gravamen of the complaint is conditions have changed such in the basin regarding fire risk and population, for example, that you can no longer rely on the 2012 RPU or the 2016 TBAP, EIS, CIR. And so I think those questions appear to be on their way to be litigated, and probably would be a good answer, or to have that question answered has actually been changed conditions, which I think is somewhat relevant to Ken's also presentation. So that's all the report I've got. Thanks.
Yeah. Very relevant. Thank you.
I have a question about that. So in the event the lawsuit prevails, let's say, then what does that do to the motions that we passed?
It's an interesting question because, we have the county acting under its own state laws and CEQA. And then you, as part of TRPA, are acting under TRPA ordinances and Article 7 of our compact, which is the environmental documentation procedures. The lawsuit is just about CEQA and the Placer County Board of Supervisors action under kind of state law. We anticipate that if the board approves, our governing board approves these amendments, and perhaps even the housing amendments that are coming next week, that there'll be another lawsuit associated with that approval. So in some sense, Judy, it may not matter, but let's assume there's not a secondary lawsuit and the plaintiffs do prevail. Then what that does is it only impacts the Placer County decision. If the TRPA has taken an action by that time that is not sued, then those changes to the regional plan and the area plan will be made, because that's within the discretion of the governing board. Now, it may be that any additional provisions that are purely related to state law may be stayed, or they may choose to go back and pull back some of the things associated with why there was a deficiency, or they may just go back and do additional environmental documentation. So it probably in that aspect depends on what the decision is, Judy.
Sure. Understandable. I'm just looking into your crystal ball, John, is there any idea of the timeline of the courts?
And Krista probably has a better idea if it stays in state court and purely as a matter of CEQA law. CEQA cases are given precedence under state law. Though it takes a while to prepare the record, to then brief, then have oral arguments. So I wouldn't expect anything within before 9 months. About a year and a half.
Yeah, I think you're right. It takes a while.
It does.
Yeah.
Something this complex. Thank you.
Great. Thank you. Okay, on to APC member updates. I'm just going to go around the table quickly. If you have anything, please share it with us. Mr. Hitchcock, Jason, Jennifer.
I have one item. Just for awareness, the NDEP has developed a new outreach listserv for folks that want to sign up for it for Army Corps 404 actions that require a 401 state certification. The federal government updated the 401 rules and procedures, and we're reacting accordingly by developing a new method of doing public comment periods on our 401 state certification decisions. And so if you're interested in NDP's 401 actions, you can go to our website and sign up for our listserv going forward. And those 401 state certification applications will be publicly noticed for 30 days going forward.
Great. Thank you, Garth.
Nothing this time. Thanks.
Thanks, Ellery. Steve?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. For the record, Steve DeShera, wearing my hat as Chair of the Board of Directors of the South Shore Transportation Management Association. As an outgrowth of our work on micro transit, the Lake Link service, a couple things. One is the City Council recently approved an additional allocation of money, so we'll be able to expand Lake Link service area within the city. Not all the way to the Y yet, that's our collective goal, but significantly farther into town. We did get funding from Douglas County, and we'll have a slight expansion to Round Hill Mall in the Round Hill neighborhood and a little farther up Lower Kingsbury. So those are positive signs, but we have also looked at and have now established a partnership with Commute with Enterprise, which is a branch of Enterprise rental cars, to do van pools that connect Carson Valley, Carson City, and even Reno to the South Shore. And I know that there's similar efforts underway on the North Shore through the Truckee North Tahoe TMA, and the town of Truckee is working to get van pools in place. And the interesting thing is, we've learned if we can position the van pools correctly, they would become part of the public transit services that we provide as a region. If we can increase the amount of public service or public transit that we do, there's actually a potential that we could get more formula money for transit services by doing so. So right now, you know, if people are van pooling or carpooling separately, this is great, wonderful. But if it can go into an overall program that can increase the transit services that we provide as a region, there's another benefit to that. So we're pretty excited about the opportunity. You know, not to give them a commercial plug, but Commute with Enterprise kind of has this down. And it's a program that we really believe strongly in, and we're working now with Caesars Tahoe and others to launch the program and make it available to any employer or any group of folks that would be interested. So thank you.
Very cool. Jennifer?
Jennifer Carr, for the record, just something to note there that I learned once we started to promote more commuting from Reno for our staff up there once telework went away for state workers, was the Reno RTC provides a benefit where if you are in a carpool or a van pool, and for some reason there's an emergency, you know, your kid breaks their leg at school and you've got to get home and the van pool's not leaving until 5. If you subscribe to a certain level of, I don't know, van pooliness, you can get, they will pay for like an Uber for you to get home in that instance outside of your van pool. So I don't know if that's an aspect that's been discussed here, but
yes,
it really gives you a lot of assurance that if something goes wrong in your life, that you have the ability to react to that.
No, appreciate the point, Jennifer. It's called Guaranteed Ride Home, and we will have a similar benefit. You know, we don't encourage people to use it for any frivolous reason, but if there isn't a family emergency or something like that, that can be available. And the other thing that Washoe RTC provides is an incentive. So any van pool that leaves Washoe County or comes back into Washoe County, they get a $400 incentive, which draws down the overall cost of the program. So many employers put up money, the employees put up money, and then there's this incentive. And we're looking at, through the South Shore TMA, maybe in partnership with TDD, providing a similar incentive. Because anything that takes down the cost of the commuting is, you know, we want to encourage people to do that. So thank you.
Very cool. Thank you. Kevin?
I don't know if you were going to cover this, Crystal, but I'm gonna say it. Placer County's throwing a parking party and you're all invited. Uh, January 10th, 5
Do we
to 7.
take Tart
in
Connect
Kings Beach.
there or what?
What?
I
It's,
just, yeah.
It's a public meeting around the parking management pilot project that's happening in North Shore, primarily Kings Beach. And it's been a long time coming. There's a very savvy, experienced consultant facilitating the meeting. Pretty excited to have them on board. And one of the big topics will be pricing and dynamic pricing and how to make it work for residents, visitors, seasonality, on peak, off peak, and just be easy to use. So tune in. I think there's going to be a follow-up that's online, but for any other jurisdictions who are thinking about it or have concerns, questions, hopefully this is going to be really good. January 10th, 5 to 7 at the Kings Beach or North Tahoe Event Center.
Great.
Thanks,
Crystal?
Kevin. Yeah, so I was going to touch on parking management, so thank you for that plug-in. So we did bring a consultant on recently, Dixon Consulting. They're working with us on formulating the parking management program. I did want to mention, we've done outreach already, and Kings Beach seems a little bit more interested in kind of moving forward with paid parking than does Tahoe City. So we're sort of focusing our efforts there as more of like a pilot. So we do have that meeting coming up. I also wanted to mention though that Palisades Tahoe reached out to us recently about partnering with them on parking management of their lots. I think you may have heard they're moving to a paid parking system. A little bit, it's a reservation system really. And we are taking an agreement forward to our board to be helping them with enforcement. So our code team at our Tahoe office already does a little bit of parking enforcement in the basin area, and now we're going to be partnering with Palisades and helping them enforce their parking. So that's our first agreement in terms of like a public-private partnership related to parking. So we're pretty excited about that. And then I had one other thing to mention on short-term rental program. We went to our board in October and kind of took the pulse of our board related to some sort of key policy considerations of that program. And so a couple of things are happening. The board wanted us to sort of create a more formal structure for our what we call our STR, short-term rentals stakeholder working group. So we're creating a charter for that right now. It's short of a Brown Act committee, but it will be a little bit more formal. And then that group will be weighing in starting, after the first of the year on some key policy considerations that the board wants us to explore. One is a reduction of our cap. Right now, our cap is at 3,900 and permits have been hovering around 32, 33. So we want to look at that, a potential reduction. The other is geographical spacing of SDRs in neighborhoods to kind of help address sort of the over-concentration of SDRs in some neighborhoods. So those are, and then there's a couple other minor things, but those are two key policy considerations that new stakeholder group will be kind of looking at and exploring over the next year. So a heads up on that.
Great. Thanks, Crystal. How about online, Miss Simon?
Yes, a couple of things. One is just so that those of you in the room know, it's still very difficult to see you. I saw the lighting is really a challenge for people participating online. I do hope to get there in person, but that wasn't going to happen today. Secondly, I'd like to just put for a field trip idea, something to do with the invasive species. Either, the location could be Tahoe Keys or it could be Emerald Bay or something like that. But I think that would be very, very valuable. And just from Crystal Bay, what's known to you as the Boulder Bay project is moving, I think, excruciatingly slowly, but they have a proposal going to the Board of Adjustment, Washoe County Board of Adjustment tomorrow. So maybe we'll see some movement on that. And I don't know, the Cal Nevis there is some activity there, but I don't think that's gone to TRPA yet. That's it.
Thanks, Judy. Mr. Young?
I just want to say, to our chair, I appreciate you. I hear that a lot nowadays, but in the old fashioned sense of the meaning, over the years here that you've been doing this, I've really appreciated your skill and talent. And so whether you go for doing it or it's somebody else, I just want to say thank you for doing such a good job while you've been doing it.
Thanks a lot, Eric. You may not be able to see me, but I smiled. Appreciate it.
Is that a nomination?
I don't know.
I move
we'll see.
nominations be closed.
Miss Chandler.
I agree with Mr. Young. Brendan, you've done an amazing job, and I think most of us hope that you'll continue. That said, I think it would be useful if you could send out to all of us a job description of both the chair and the vice chair, because that will make it easier for people to decide whether or not they want to put their name forward, preferably for vice chair. And putting on my hat as water quality for Tahoe Keys, I'm very pleased to announce that the homeowners decided to fund the controlled methods test for year 3, and we've had excellent results during year 2. So things are moving forward as far as the invasive species there. We would gladly host a field trip there, but it probably should wait until summer when weeds are growing. I don't think you'd see very much right now. And that's true also of what's going on up at Taylor Creek. That's all.
Excellent. Thank you. Do we have job descriptions, and can you include the pay? Yeah, we should think about that. Just quickly from me, the county completed a big EIP project, which is the San Bernardino Bike Path project out in the North Upper Truckee neighborhood here on the South Shore, but it's a major connection point from a highly local neighborhood, which is the North Upper Truckee neighborhood, into the town of Myers, including the elementary school. And it's really highly used already. We just opened it, and we do have a pedestrian counter on it, and so the data is going to be pretty interesting to see. And we also, Crystal, have a VHR advisory committee that's been meeting. It's short of a Brown Act, but more formal, and it will be making recommendations to our board on how to adjust our program as well. So that's going to be pretty interesting. Should happen first quarter or so next year. So we're getting a lot out of them. Thank you all. Final real agenda item here, agenda item 8, closing public interest comments. If any member of the public wishes to address the Advisory Planning Commission, please either come to the podium or raise your hand by clicking the raise hand button at the bottom of your Zoom screen or by dialing *9 on your phone. Just a reminder, unheard comments can be submitted via email to publiccomment@trpa.gov. Please note the APC is prohibited by law from taking immediate action on or discussing issues raised by the public not listed on our agenda. And first we'll go to Ms. Waller, and then we'll go online.
Thank you. I'm going to close with a quote from Thomas Edison, and it'll be related to the remainder of my comment. Being busy does not always mean real work. The object of all work is production or accomplishment, and to either of these ends, there must be forethought, system, planning, intelligence, and honest purpose. I would like Placer County in the future to come back to the public. I don't care if it's at the Board of Supervisors. I don't care if it's at the TRPA on the failed community enhancement program. We are now going forward with 2017 changes as perceived failures. The BBLLC project, which is now Kings Barn, is going into another 2-year extension due to another developer. It was approved yesterday at the Board of Supervisors. The 1990s had parking management plans, never brought forward into the 2017 planning cycle for accomplishment. La Lima is being piecemealed, sold Fast forward, Tahoe City Lodge. I think it's shameful that putting in porte-cochere posts is progress. Sandy Beach did the same thing. That's a long and age-old lawsuit. I just think creating new programs with no benchmarks that are required doesn't help the public understand bringing all of these new changes. I want to thank Ms. Ticer. She was spot on, urban versus rural. Ms. Signitos, all the commenters today have spent many, many hours, just like you have, on reviewing these documents that'll be going forward in January to the Regional Plan Committee and then to the Governing Board. And I was really surprised that County Council brought up, not County Council, excuse me, TRPA Council has brought up that there might be a lawsuit against the housing amendments that are coming next week. Thank you.
Thank you. Catherine.
Oh, Mr. Chair, there's one hand raised online so far. Pamela Sigdinos, if you unmute, you can address the commission.
Yes, thank you. First, I wanted to comment on something that was said by the commission can you hear me? First, I'd like to comment on one of the comments made by a commission member about walking in Incline Village to Rayleigh's, etc. It's very important to know that our existing multi-use paths are very rarely plowed in the winter, which means people are walking in the already crowded 2-lane streets. In the summer, e-bikes race by, and there are very poor pedestrian crossings, making multi-use paths rather deadly if you want to get across the road. So just wanted to get that on the record. Second, I'm very disappointed that the TRPA APC voted unanimously in favor of these inadequately researched amendments. It's clear from the public comments submitted and the public participation in recent meetings that the vast majority of Tahoe residents, particularly those not associated with commercial development, the real estate, or lobbyists and attorneys, oppose the proposed amendments. If there had been a public referendum of Tahoe registered voters, these amendments would have failed at the ballot box. I'd also like to highlight some faulty logic and lack of intellectual honesty around the formation of these amendments. There is not a lack of housing in the Tahoe Basin. What there is, however, is very poor STR policy that favors tourists over residents. These policies favor TOT collection over the needs of those who need a place to live. You just have to accept that is the truth. I'd also like to comment on some of the commission statements today. The commission has now approved these amendments, so I'd like to underscore Ellery's comments. It's imperative that the commission put in place strict and regular monitoring of these amendment impacts. I'd like to suggest monthly updates with a more formal annual review that looks deeply at the congestion and concerns that were raised in the public comments. As for one member of the commission's comment on blight in Tahoe communities, keep in mind, the public is not responsible for the blight. This blight is a result of bad policy and private developers looking for the highest return on investments. Please don't conflate bad policy and public resistance to these amendments. The public has legitimate concerns about the changes in our environment, in the overall visitation in the basin, and the climate, and we should not be thrown into a category of resistors for the sake of resistance when we're asking very meaningful questions and requesting more analysis. Thank you for your time today.
Thank you, Pamela, for your comments.
Mr. Chair, excuse me, Mr. Chair, there are no other hands raised to comment on this item.
Okay, thank you, Catherine. With that, thank you all for your time. Let's move to adjournment. Do I have a motion to adjourn? So moved. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All right, we stand adjourned at 1:20. Thank you all. Happy holidays. Be safe. Enjoy your time with your friends and family.